Welcome back to the quiet apothecary. Take a slow breath and let it out even more slowly than it came in. Settle down into whatever soft thing is holding you tonight and let your shoulders drop an inch, and then another inch, until there is nothing left in them to hold. Tonight we are not going to any cupboard, and we are not going to any single room. Tonight we are going to a whole garden, and more than a garden, for it belongs to a great castle in a green and settled corner of the old world, some 400 or 500 years behind us in time. Though the exact year does not matter, and will not be asked of you again. There is a wall of pale stone around this garden, warmed all day by the sun and still faintly warm after dark, and within that wall there are many gardens folded into one, a kitchen garden of practical green things, a physic garden of quieter healing beds, a pleasure garden of turf seats and shaded walks, and tucked at the edges, a still house, a drying loft, a row of straw hives, and an orchard corner where the grass grows long and soft. We are going to walk through all of it, slowly, area by area. From the grey hour before the household wakes to the hushed hour after the gate is finally locked for the night. There is nothing to learn here and nothing to remember. There will be no test of it in the morning, and no part of you needs to hold on to any of it. If your mind drifts halfway through a sentence and does not come back, that is not a failure of listening, that is the whole and entire point. Let the voice carry on without you, the way a stream carries on without asking the bank's permission. All you are asked to do tonight is to lie still and breathe slowly, and let an old, quiet garden be built around you, stone by stone and bed by bed, until you are inside it and cannot quite remember climbing the wall to get there. Every castle worth the name kept a garden, and often several gardens at once, tucked wherever the walls allowed a patch of open ground to catch the sun. It might lie within the inner bailey, close under the windows of the hall, so that the lord and his household could look down from above and see the neat green rows laid out like a map of somebody's careful thinking. It might lie beyond the moat entirely, in an outer close given over wholly to growing things, safer from trampling feet and stray livestock, walked to rather than glanced at. Wherever it lay, it was never an afterthought. A castle fed itself as much as it defended itself, and healed itself as much as either, and a garden did both of those quiet jobs at once, feeding the kitchen and stocking the sickroom from the very same soil. We begin, as the gardener himself would begin, before the sun is properly up, when the grey light is just enough to show you the shape of the wall, and not yet enough to show you the colour of anything growing against it. Come with me now, quietly, through the small gate in that long stone wall, and let us see what a night's rest has left waiting for us inside. The wall itself is the first thing you would notice. If you were walking this ground for the first time, because it is not a low hedge or a line of stakes, but a true wall, built of the same pale stone as the keep above it, high enough that a grown man cannot see over it without standing on something, and thick enough to hold the day's heat long after the sun has gone. Walls like this one served more than one purpose at once, as most things in a castle did. They kept out the deer and the wandering goats and the careless cart wheel, certainly, but they also caught the sun and held it, so that the beds along the southern face of the wall ripened their fruit a little earlier than beds standing in the open, and so that a tender herb, one that might have shivered in an open field, could be coaxed to grow a season longer than it had any right to expect. At this hour the wall is beaded with a fine grey dew, and the mist has not yet decided whether to lift or to settle deeper into the low ground near the postern gate. That postern, the small side door cut into the great wall, is not the grand entrance a visitor would use. It is a plain door of oak, iron-banded, its hinges kept quiet with tallow, because it is opened and shut so many times in a single day that a squeak would become, very quickly, the most tiresome sound in the whole castle. The gardener keeps its key on a cord at his belt, alongside the keys to the drying loft and the seed store, and he is very often the very first person in the whole household to be awake, earlier even than the cook, earlier than the baker whose ovens must be lit while the sky is still black. Beyond the postern, before your eyes have adjusted, the garden is more felt than seen. You sense the shape of it before you can name any single part, a long rectangle of turned earth and low hedges running away from you into the mist, divided by narrow paths of beaten soil or old brick, each path just wide enough for a wheelbarrow or two people walking abreast. Somewhere off to the left, unseen yet, there is the low murmuring of bees not yet fully roused, still huddled warm inside their straw skeps against the last of the night's chill. Somewhere ahead, a fountain or a well, you cannot yet tell which, gives off a small continuous sound of water, patient and unhurried, the kind of sound that a garden needs almost as much as it needs sunlight, for silence alone can feel strange in so large and living a space. The smell reaches you before your eyes have made much sense of the shapes, and it is not one smell but many folded together, cut grass and turned soil beneath a top note of something green and slightly bitter, rue perhaps, or the low leaves of wormwood bruised by a careless boot the evening before. Later in the day, when the sun has properly climbed and warmed the beds, that smell will grow sharper and more varied. Rosemary and lavender and thyme all giving up their oils to the heat, but at this early hour it is soft and undefined, more a suggestion of green than a catalogue of it, and that softness is, in its own way, a kindness to a tired mind. There is nothing here yet that demands to be identified. You may simply stand a moment inside the gate and breathe it in, and let your eyes slowly adjust to the grey shapes of hedges and beds and the low stone rim of a well, without any obligation to know their names before you are ready. As the light grows by degrees, so slow you could not point to the moment it changed, the garden begins to resolve itself into something closer to order. What had seemed, in the mist, like a single tangled green mass now shows itself to be a careful arrangement, beds set square and true, edged with low boards, or with woven withes bent into a low fence no higher than a man's shin, paths running straight where the ground allowed it, and curving gently where an old tree or a stubborn outcrop of rock had refused, generations before, to be moved. Nothing here is wild, though parts of it, especially at the garden's furthest edge, are allowed to look a little wild on purpose, for the eye, like the rest of a tired body, needs somewhere to rest that does not ask to be understood. It would be easy, standing here in the grey hour, to think of this whole enclosure as one single thing, one garden with one purpose, but that would be a kindness paid to simplicity rather than to truth. What lies within these walls is closer to a small country of its own, with its own provinces and its own customs, a kitchen province of practical greens, a physic province of quiet healing beds, a pleasure province of shade and scent where no one is expected to work at all, and smaller settlements besides, a still house tucked against the warmest wall, a drying loft above the old stable, a scatter of straw hives at the garden's furthest corner where the bees can work undisturbed. We will visit each of these provinces in its turn tonight, slowly without hurry, the way the gardener himself would walk them on an ordinary morning, checking each in turn the way a shepherd counts a flock, not because any single bed is in danger, but because the checking itself is a kind of quiet, steady comfort, both to the garden and to the man who tends it. For now, though, before we walk any further, let us simply stand a while longer just inside the gate and let the last of the mist finish lifting off the paths. And let the first proper birdsong begin somewhere in the hedge along the eastern wall, and let ourselves grow slowly, gently accustomed to being here at all, in this old green place, on this quiet grey morning, with nothing at all expected of us but to notice it softly and let it hold us a while. The man who is coming through the postern gate now, a lantern in one hand, though the light scarcely needs it any longer, is the person to whom this whole small country truly belongs, in the sense that matters, the sense of daily care rather than legal ownership. He is the head gardener of the castle, and though his name will rarely appear in the grand chronicles that record sieges and marriages, and the comings and goings of lords, his work is written all through the household's own accounts, in the wages paid, the tools bought, the seed and root stock ordered from further afield, and above all in the quiet fact that the household eats and heals a little better most years because of the steady patience of his hands. A castle of any real size kept such a man on its own payroll, a member of the household staff in the same practical sense as the cook or the steward or the falconer, paid a wage, given lodging, and expected, in return, to keep the gardens in good order through every season of the year. His post might be called, in the old household roles, simply the gardener, though in some records a slightly grander Latin term was used, the sort of formal word a clerk liked to reach for when writing an account book meant to be read by someone above him. Whatever the word used, the daily work beneath it was the same: early rising, long hours, and a patience that could not be hurried by anyone, not even by a hungry household or an impatient lord who wanted roses in a month that had no intention of producing them. He rarely worked alone, and this early hour, before the household proper is stirring, is in fact one of the few times of day he does have entirely to himself. Later, once the sun is fully up, he will be joined by his boys, for that is what the household called them, whatever their true ages, the younger hands who weeded and watered and carried and dug under his direction, learning the trade the only way it has ever truly been learned, by doing the smallest and most repetitive tasks first, for years, until their hands knew a weed from a seedling, without their eyes needing to check twice. Some of these boys were the gardener's own sons, following their father's trade the way most trades were followed in that world, learned at the elbow rather than from any book. Others were simply local boys taken on, for a season or a year, glad of the small wage and the steady meals that came with castle service, even if the work itself was, on any given day, mostly bending and pulling and carrying water in heavy wooden buckets from the well to the beds that needed it most. The tools of this trade were few, and, by our own standards, rather humble, and yet each one had earned its place through long use and no small amount of trial. There was the spade, iron shod at its working edge, heavier in the hand than you might expect, and there was the hoe, for breaking the crust of soil that formed after rain, and for cutting down the endless small green intruders that a garden, left unwatched even a week, would happily fill itself with. There were wooden rakes for smoothing a newly turned bed, and there were knives, small and sharp, and kept always at the belt, for cutting herbs cleanly rather than tearing them, since a clean cut healed faster on the plant, and kept the bed producing longer through a season. There was, too, a good deal of simple rope, and withy for tying and staking, for training a climbing rose along a wall, or holding a young fruit tree steady against the wind until its own roots had grown strong enough to hold it. The gardener's year had a shape as fixed, in its own way, as the church calendar that ran alongside it, and in truth the two calendars often leaned on one another, for saints' days were as good a marker as any for knowing when to sow a particular seed or lift a particular root. Early spring brought the turning of beds left follow through winter, working in whatever manure or old leaf mold had been saved through the cold months, and the first careful sowings of the hardier greens. As the days lengthened, there was a long season of near constant weeding, for weeds, unlike the herbs and vegetables the gardener actually wanted, needed no coaxing at all to thrive, and left unchecked for even a fortnight could choke a whole bed of its rightful tenants. Summer brought harvest upon harvest, cut a little at a time rather than all at once. For a garden that fed a household needed a steady trickle of green things coming in through the kitchen door, rather than one great glut followed by months of nothing. Autumn brought the lifting of roots, the saving of seed for next year, and the slow retreat of the more tender plantings indoors, or under cover against the frost that was surely coming, whatever the calendar said about its exact arrival. Winter, at last, brought pruning of the fruit trees and the roses, the mending of tools, and a slower, quieter pace of work that still, even so, never quite stopped altogether, for a garden, even asleep, has weeds of its own that do not observe the season, and beds that still, on the mildest days, want checking. It is worth pausing here, in this grey and gentle hour, to notice something about this man's work that a busier age might easily overlook. He was, in the truest sense, a keeper of patience as much as a keeper of plants. A seed does not hurry for anyone, not for a hungry household, and not for an impatient lord. And the whole of the gardener's craft was built on an acceptance of that fact, a willingness to do the same small careful task. Day after day, without any of the drama that fills a chronicle, trusting that the slow unseen work beneath the soil would, in its own good time, and not one day sooner, come up green. Let that thought settle over you now gently, the way the last of the mist is settling and thinning across the beds ahead of us. There is no need to hurry through this garden tonight. We have, in truth, the whole of the night ahead of us, and the gardener himself would tell you, if you asked him, that hurrying a garden has never once made it grow faster, only made the gardener himself more tired for no good reason. So let us walk on slowly now, past the low hedge that marks the edge of his own province, and into the first of the great gardens Folded within these walls, the kitchen garden, where the most ordinary and most necessary of all the green things grow. The walled kitchen garden lies closest to the postern gate for a very practical reason that has nothing to do with beauty and everything to do with the cook's daily needs. A kitchen cannot wait for someone to walk a great distance for a handful of parsley or a single leek, not when a pot is already on the boil and a dish is halfway made. And so the beds that feed the daily table are always the beds nearest the door, close enough that a scullery boy can be sent running out for a fistful of something green and be back again before the water has fully returned to the boil. Here the ground is divided into long, narrow beds, each one raised slightly above the level of the path, edged with low boards of oak, or with woven fencing bent low to the ground, a practical arrangement that kept the soil from washing out onto the path in heavy rain and made it easier, too, for a kneeling gardener to reach every part of a bed without ever having to step onto the soil itself and pack it hard beneath his knees. The paths between the beds are of beaten earth, or in the grander houses of old brick laid flat, worn smooth in places by generations of the same careful feet walking the same careful routes. Along the beds nearest the wall, where the stone holds its warmth longest into the evening, grow the leafy greens that a medieval kitchen leaned on more heavily than we might now expect, for a diet built largely on bread and pottage needed all the green freshness a garden could supply to keep it from growing dull. There is parsley here in broad curling clumps, valued not only for its bright flavor, but for a lingering old reputation as a herb that settled the stomach and sweetened the breath. There are onions and leeks, planted in patient rows, their tall thin green shoots giving little hint, above ground, of the sturdy bulb, or the pale swollen stem quietly forming beneath the soil. Both of them staples of a household kitchen, in a way that would be hard to overstate, for a pottage without an onion in it was, to most medieval cooks, hardly worth calling a pottage at all. There is cabbage too, in its broad rounded heads, planted a little apart from its neighbours, to give its leaves room to spread. And there are turnips lifted from an earlier sowing, their green tops still fresh, even as the roots below are pulled and carried off toward the kitchen door. Beans climb a row of staked poles at the bed's edge, their small white flowers giving way, through the summer, to long green pods that will be picked young and tender or left, some of them, to dry hard on the vine for winter storage. Along the very edge of the beds, where a low border of aromatic green does double duty as both herb and hedge, there is thyme and there is chives, their thin hollow stems ready to be snipped with a single quick pass of the gardener's knife whenever the kitchen calls for them. None of this is grand or ceremonial. This is the working heart of the whole garden, the province that fed the household every single day of the year. And it shows in the practical closeness of its beds, the worn smoothness of its paths, and the constant coming and going, even at this early hour, of a kitchen boy sent out for whatever the morning's first pot requires. And yet there is a quiet satisfaction in this ordinariness too, the deep, settled satisfaction of a thing that simply and reliably works, season after season, year after year, without ever once needing to announce itself. If you crouch down now, here at the edge of the parsley bed, and let your hand rest lightly on the cool, damp soil, you might notice how alive it feels even at this early hour, faintly warm already in patches where the wall's stored heat is beginning to reach it, faintly cool in the shaded corners where the sun has not yet found its way. This is soil that has been turned and fed and tended for years, perhaps for generations, each season's harvest returning something to it in the form of old leaves and spent stalks worked back into the ground, so that the bed itself seems in a slow, patient way to remember every gardener who has ever knelt beside it. We could stay here a good while longer, simply resting beside these ordinary and faithful rows. And there would be no harm at all in doing exactly that, letting your breathing slow further, letting the small sounds of this early garden, a bee stirring somewhere, a bird settling on the wall above, become the whole and entire shape of your attention. But there is more of this garden waiting for us, further in, past a low gate in a second, inner hedge, where the beds grow quieter and more separate from one another, and where the herbs planted are chosen not for the kitchen pot at all, but for a gentler and older kind of care. Through that low inner gate, the character of the garden changes, gently but unmistakably. The beds here are smaller and more numerous, each one holding a single kind of plant, rather than the mixed and practical rows of the kitchen garden, and each one is a little more carefully edged, a little more deliberately set apart from its neighbors, as though the whole arrangement were meant to be read almost like a page of careful writing. One plant, one bed, one purpose, moving in an orderly line down the length of the enclosure. This is the Physic garden, the quiet province of the whole grounds given over entirely to the herbs a household leaned on when someone within its walls fell sick, or simply grew tired, or could not sleep, or needed something gentle for an ache that had settled into a joint and would not leave. It is worth saying plainly that the line between a kitchen herb and a medicine herb was, in this old world, a good deal thinner than we might now assume. Many of the same plants did service in both provinces, sage flavoring a dish on one day and easing a sore throat on another, and the careful separation of these beds owed less to any strict boundary between food and medicine than to a simple, practical wish to keep like with like, so that a hand reaching for a healing herb in a hurry, in the dim light of an early morning, with a sick child waiting indoors, would not have to search through a bed of ordinary pot herbs first. Here, set a little apart in its own square of turned soil, grows rue, a low shrubby plant with small blue-green leaves and a smell sharp enough to clear a drowsy head in a single breath. Rue carried, in this old world, a very old reputation indeed, said to guard against the evil eye by some, and simply trusted by most as a strengthener of failing sight and a settler of an uneasy stomach, and it was handled always with a certain respect, for its oils could raise a rash on tender skin if bruised too carelessly against bare fingers. Nearby, in a bed of its own, grows wormwood, its fine silvery leaves almost soft to look at though their taste, as anyone who has ever chewed a single leaf by accident will tell you, is bitter beyond almost anything else growing in this garden. That very bitterness was its whole virtue in the old thinking, for a bitter herb was widely trusted to drive off the small creeping worms that plagued both children and livestock, and a sprig of it, laid among stored linen, was trusted too to keep the moth from a good winter cloak. A little further along, betony grows in a broad and generous clump, its purple spikes of flower rising above soft, faintly wrinkled leaves And of all the herbs in this whole physic garden, Bituni may have held the very widest reputation of any single plant, trusted by old writers and old wives alike as a remedy for nearly everything that could trouble a body: headache and fever and bad dreams, and a weak stomach, all named among the long list of complaints it was thought to ease. Whether it truly answered every one of those old hopes, we cannot now say with any certainty, and there is no need for us to settle that question tonight, only to notice how deeply this one modest plant was trusted, bed after bed, household after household, across so very many quiet years. Feverfew grows close by, its small white flowers, each with a bright yellow center, nodding gently even in the stillest air, and its name alone tells you plainly enough what it was gathered for: a herb reached for whenever a fever set in and needed, if not curing outright, then at least the comfort of something being done, some small green action taken against an illness that otherwise left a household simply waiting and hoping. And here, in the sunniest corner of this whole quiet province, grows sage, broad and grey-green and faintly furred to the touch, a plant so widely trusted across so many centuries that an old saying, repeated in more than one household, asked plainly why a man should ever die while sage grew in his own garden. It was chewed for a sore mouth, steeped for a weak stomach, and simply enjoyed too, for its steady, dependable presence, the kind of plant a gardener need never worry over. Hardy through a hard winter and generous through every summer that followed. These beds are tended with a particular care that goes a little beyond the ordinary attention paid to the kitchen rose for a mistake here, a herb misidentified, or a dose misjudged, carried consequences a spoiled cabbage never could. The gardener who oversaw this part of the grounds worked closely in the greater households with whoever held the household's medical knowledge, be that a resident physician for the grandest of castles, or more often, in truth, the lady of the house herself, or an older woman of the household long trusted with such things, her own knowledge passed down through years of quiet practice, rather than through any formal training a chronicle would trouble itself to record. Notice, if you will, how orderly this whole quiet province feels compared to the busy, practical rows we walked through only a few minutes ago. There is less coming and going here. Fewer boys running back and forth with baskets, and a slower, more deliberate quality to the whole space, as though even the plants themselves understood that their purpose was a graver and gentler one than simply filling a pot. Let that slower quality settle into you now, here among the rue and the wormwood and the broad grey sage, and let your own breathing slow to match it, unhurried, patient, asking nothing of the coming minutes beyond, simply being present for them. There is one more thing worth knowing about this physic garden before we walk on, and it is a small thing, but a telling one. The beds here were laid out, wherever the household could manage it, with some thought given to the old learning that had come down from much older gardens than this one, gardens kept by scholars and physicians in centuries further back still, who had written, in careful Latin, of which herbs suited which ailments, and in what manner of soil each preferred to grow. A castle's physic garden was rarely, if ever, a place of pure invention. It was, far more often, a living copy of learning passed down and adjusted, bed by careful bed, generation after generation, each gardener adding what his own eyes had taught him to what his own teacher had once shown him in turn. Let us walk on now, past the last of the Physic Beds, along a path that curves gently around an old apple tree standing alone at the corner of the two gardens, its low branches already showing the small hard green beginnings of fruit that will not ripen for months yet. The sun is properly up now, though still low and soft, laying long gold stripes across the paths. And somewhere behind us, back near the postern gate, you can hear the first sounds of the wider household beginning to stir: a door, a bucket, a distant voice calling something we are too far away to make out clearly. None of that need trouble us. We are still walking slowly, and there is nowhere else we are expected to be. This next corner of the garden is given over to a purpose that might seem, at first telling, a strange one to modern ears, and yet it was, for many centuries, one of the most constant and practical uses to which a garden's produce was put. Here grow the herbs gathered not for the pot, and not for the sickroom, but for the floor, the great stone or beaten earth floor of the hall itself, the largest and most public room in the whole castle, where the household ate together, and where much of its daily life, its judgments and its gatherings, and its evening warmth around the fire, all took place at once. It is worth pausing a moment to picture that hall floor as it truly was, for it bears little resemblance to any floor most of us walk on now. Stone or packed earth, cold and hard, it was covered, in a well-kept household, with a layer of rushes, cut from the marshy ground near a river or a pond, laid thick enough to soften the footing and to hold in a little warmth against the season's chill. And laid in among those plain rushes, scattered by the generous handful, were sweet herbs, gathered here in this very corner of the garden and carried indoors in wide baskets, whose whole purpose was simply to smell pleasant when crushed underfoot by the passing traffic of a busy hall. Meadowsweet grows here in tall creamy sprays, its small, clustered flowers giving off, when bruised, a sweetness somewhere between honey and new hay, and it was, of all the strewing herbs, perhaps the most beloved, gathered by the armful through the warmer months, and scattered fresh whenever the household expected guests worth impressing, or simply whenever the floor beneath the day's ordinary traffic had begun to smell a little too much like the day's ordinary traffic. Lavender grows in a long silvery border along the path's edge, its narrow spikes just beginning to show the first hint of purple. And though we think of lavender today mostly for its scent alone, in this garden it served the very same practical purpose as its plainer neighbors, cut and dried and scattered to sweeten a room, its oils released underfoot in small fragrant bursts with every passing step. Tansy grows a little further along, its flat golden clusters of small button flowers standing bright against deeply cut, almost fern-like leaves. And though its scent is sharper and less immediately sweet than lavender's, it carried a second and very practical virtue besides its perfume, for tansy was widely trusted in this old world to discourage the fleas and small biting creatures that a hall full of rushes and rich food and gathered people could all too easily attract. And here, spreading low and soft across a shaded bed near the hedge, grows chamomile, its small daisy-like flowers nodding on thin stems above finely divided leaves, and its gentle apple-scented breath, released whenever crushed, was as much valued for strewing as it would later be in a different corner of this garden that we will visit before the night is through. valued for calming a restless body towards sleep. The gathering of these herbs was its own small, regular task in the gardener's calendar, and it fell most often to his boys, who would come through this corner of the garden with wide, shallow baskets, cutting whatever was fullest and freshest that week, careful not to strip any single bed too bare, for a bed cut back too hard would take weeks to recover its fullness, and the whole floor needed sweetening again and again, week after week, not merely once. The cut herbs were carried indoors while still fresh, for their scent was strongest and most generous in those first hours after cutting, and a household with any sense of occasion, expecting an important guest or preparing for a feast, would see to it that the floor was freshly strewn that very morning, so that every footstep through the hall that evening released, quietly and pleasantly, the whole soft memory of this garden into the air above the gathered company. There is something worth sitting with, here in this corner, about the sheer ordinary generosity of this practice. These herbs asked nothing grand of anyone. They were not saved for the sick, nor reserved for the Lord's own table, but scattered underfoot for every single person who crossed that hall floor, servant and guest and household child alike, all of them walking, without perhaps ever once thinking about it, through the same soft cloud of meadow sweet and lavender and chamomile. A small kindness offered daily to everyone at once, and asking, in return, nothing more than the gardener's steady, unremarkable labor of cutting and carrying and cutting again. Let your own breathing settle into that same steady rhythm now, if it has not already, unhurried and generous, asking nothing of you but the next slow breath, and then the one after that. We are going to walk on a little further, past the last of the strewing beds, toward a smaller and rather more particular corner of this garden, one whose herbs were destined not for the floor beneath anyone's feet, but for the Lord's own table, and for the careful, watchful hands of the steward who oversaw it. The steward of a great household held a post of considerable trust and no small amount of daily worry, for it fell to him to see that the Lord's table was kept in a manner fitting the household standing, and that every dish, every cup of spiced wine, every small flourish of colour or scent that marked a great house apart from a lesser one, was managed carefully within the bounds of what the household could afford and what the season could provide. A good part of his careful management depended, more than we might now expect, on this very corner of the garden. Mint grows here in generous, spreading clumps, forever threatening to overrun its own bed and creep into its neighbours, and it found its way to the Lord's table in more forms than a modern kitchen might easily guess, chopped fine into a sauce to accompany a roasted meat, or steeped whole into a cup meant to settle a stomach after too rich a feast. Its cousin, sage, already met once in the Physic Beds, appears here again too, for the line between a healing herb and a flavouring herb, as we noticed before, was never so firm a line as we might now assume, and sage found its way into sauces and stuffings as readily as it found its way into a remedy for a sore throat. In the very warmest, most sheltered bed of this whole corner, given the very best of the wall's stored sun, grows saffron, its slender purple flowers, when they appear at all, guarded almost as closely as anything else in the whole garden, for the tiny golden threads at the flower's center, gathered by hand, thread by careful thread, were among the most costly and most prized of all the plant products a household could grow or buy. A great household proud enough of its own resources, and fortunate enough in its soil and climate, might grow a modest patch of its own saffron, though far more often the golden threads that coloured a lord's dish a rich, sunlit yellow, or tinted his wine, had travelled a long distance to reach this table at all, and the small patch grown here, if grown at all, was a matter of household pride rather than of any real supply. Nearby, in an unassuming corner easily overlooked, grow the crab-apple trees whose small, hard, sour fruit supplied verjuice a sharp, tart juice pressed from unripe fruit and used throughout the kitchen much the way we might now reach for a splash of vinegar or lemon, brightening a rich sauce, cutting through the fat of a roasted bird, and carrying, besides, a certain reputation for settling a stomach that had taken in more rich food than it entirely knew what to do with. And here, along the sunniest wall of this corner, climb the household's own grape vines, trained carefully against the warm stone, their fruit destined less for eating fresh, and more for the household's own small production of verjuice, or, in the more fortunate and more southerly of these old castles, for a modest wine of its own, steeped together with these fruits and their herbs, warmed gently with honey, and a careful hand of costly spice, brought from far beyond these walls, cinnamon perhaps, or a little precious pepper, came the spiced wine that graced the grandest of a lord's evenings, a drink whose name in the old household accounts we might render loosely as Hippocras, poured out at the close of a feast as both a digestive comfort and a small, warming ceremony marking the meal's end. The steward himself, or more often one of his own trusted under-stewards, would walk this corner of the garden with the gardener from time to time, discussing, in the low, practical voices of two men each responsible for a different piece of the same larger puzzle, what the coming season's feasts might require, what herbs were plentiful and which had disappointed, and whether a particular bed might be given over this year to something the household had not yet tried growing for itself. It was a quiet, careful partnership, this one, between the man who grew and the man who served, each depending entirely on the other's steady competence, and each, in his own way, taking a real pride in seeing a great table well and generously furnished from ground the household itself had tended. Rest here a moment longer, among the mint and the sage and the sheltered patch of saffron, and let yourself imagine, if you like, though there is no obligation in it at all, the low golden light of a great hall in the evening, a long table, a company gathered, and somewhere beneath all of it, quietly present in every dish and every poured cup, the patient labour of this very corner of the garden, gathered and carried and prepared by hands that most of the diners would never once think to thank, and did not need to, for the work itself asked no thanks, only the steady doing of it, season after season. We are going to walk on again now, this time toward the warmest wall of the whole enclosure, where a low, squat building of the same pale stone stands with a thin curl of smoke rising, even at this hour, from a small chimney set into its roof. This is the still house, and though it is one of the smaller structures within these walls, it is, in its own quiet way, one of the most carefully guarded, for the work done inside it required a patience and a precision that even the Physic garden, careful as it was, did not quite demand in the same measure. Inside, In a room kept always a little warm and a little close, stands the still itself, a curious vessel of hammered copper, its rounded body narrowing at the top into a long, gently curving arm that leads down into a small, waiting vessel below. This is the alembic, a device whose origins lay a very long way from this castle, in learning that had travelled slowly, over generations and across a great distance, before finding its way at last into the greatest and most prosperous of households in this part of the world. It should be said honestly that not every castle, and not even every great one, possessed such a device or such a room, for true distillation of this careful kind was, in these centuries, still very much a mark of the most fortunate and most forward-looking of households, a craft only beginning to take proper root, here even as it had already flowered more fully elsewhere. And we should hold that fact gently, as one more small true thing about this particular castle's particular fortune, rather than assume every household of the age enjoyed the very same still room comforts. The work done here was slow almost beyond describing, and required a stillness of hand and of mind that suited perhaps no one in the whole household better than the same patient temperament that made a good gardener in the first place. Rose petals, gathered at their fullest and freshest, still faintly cool with morning dew, were laid into the still's lower chamber, and a low, steady fire beneath coaxed a gentle heat upward through them, never so hot as to scorch, only warm enough, held for hour upon patient hour, to draw the petals' own fragrant moisture up and away from them, to rise as a fine vapor along the curving copper arm, and to cool, at last, drop by careful drop, into the waiting vessel below as rose water, clear and faintly perfumed and altogether more precious, ounce for ounce, than almost anything else this garden produced. Lavender, too, found its way into the still's slow work, its narrow spikes yielding, through the very same patient process, a water of their own, sharper and cleaner smelling than the rose water, and prized for its own separate uses, a few careful drops added to a linen chest to keep it sweet, or dabbed, on a bad night, at a tired brow in the hope of easing a headache towards sleep. These waters, once made, were treated with real care throughout the household, stored in small stoppered glass or earthenware vessels, and used sparingly, for the labor behind each one had been considerable, and could not simply be repeated at will. Rose water found its way into the kitchen as often as into the sickroom, brightening a delicate dish or a sweet confection with a scent no ordinary herb could quite match, and finding its way, too, into the lady's own quiet toilette, a few drops upon a cloth used to freshen the skin or scent a favored garment. Stand here a moment in this warm, close room, and let the faint, sweet smell of rose still lingering in the air settle over you the way it might settle, in truth, over anyone who worked here for even a single afternoon, for the scent of this room, once made, was almost impossible to fully wash away, and clung gently to whoever spent their days tending this slow and patient craft. There is nothing hurried anywhere in this room, and nothing that could be hurried even if the whole household wished it, for the still works at its own pace, drop by drop, and asks of everyone near it the very same patience it asks of itself. Let us leave the still house now, its slow work continuing quietly behind us, without any need of our watching over it, and walk on toward a smaller building set a little apart from the rest, close by the Physic Beds but not quite among them, its shuttered window facing east to catch the first gentle light of morning. This is where the household's sick were tended, not a hospital in any grand sense, for most castles were far too modest in size to need one, but a quiet room, or sometimes no more than a curtained corner of a larger chamber, set aside for whoever within the household had taken ill and needed rest and quiet, and the patient care of someone who knew a little of healing. In the grandest of these households, that care might fall to a physician kept on the household's own payroll, a learned man trained in the old texts that had come down through centuries of careful copying, treating both the Lord's own family and, when time and standing allowed, the wider household besides. But in a great many castles, and perhaps in most of them, the true weight of this quiet daily care fell instead to the lady of the household, or to an older woman long trusted with such matters, her knowledge gathered not from any book, but from years of simple practice, watching what eased a fever and what did not, learning which herb settled a child's stomach, and which merely made a bitter afternoon of an already difficult day. Whoever carried this quiet responsibility walked often to the Physic Beds we visited earlier, and it is worth returning there for a moment now, in our minds, to notice how directly those careful rows of rue and wormwood and betony fed straight into this small, shuttered room. Chamomile, gathered here in dried bundles hung from the low rafters, was steeped into a gentle tea for a restless stomach or a mind too troubled to settle towards sleep, its soft apple scent filling the small room with something close to comfort even before the tea itself had done any of its quiet work. Comfrey, its broad leaves rough to the touch and its root thick and pale beneath the soil, held an old and steady reputation as a mender of injured flesh and broken bone, earning it, in more than one household tongue, a simple, honest nickname, Knitbone, for the poultice made from its crushed root and leaf was trusted, laid over a break or a bad bruise and bound firmly in place, to draw the injury toward healing and to ease, at the very least, the deep aching stiffness that so often lingered long after a bone itself had begun to mend. Betony appears here again too, carried in from the Physic Beds in dried, careful bundles, steeped for headache and for fever both, its wide old reputation as a cure for nearly everything finding its truest daily use, perhaps, in exactly this small shuttered room, offered again and again to whoever within the household had taken to their bed that week, a familiar, steady comfort, even when the complaint itself varied from one sufferer to the next, for pain that would not otherwise ease, and for the deep, uneasy sleeplessness that so often accompanies real illness. The household turned, carefully and sparingly, to poppy, its dried seed heads and their milky sap, handled always with a real and proper caution, for its power to ease pain and bring on sleep was matched by an equal power to do real harm if used without care. It was measured out, when it was used at all, by whoever in the household held the surest and most experienced hand, a small careful dose meant to bring rest to a suffering body, rather than any deeper or more dangerous sleep. There is a particular quality to the light in this small room, even now, in the low morning hour, filtering softly through a shuttered window not yet fully opened. And it is worth letting that soft, dim quality settle over you a while, the way it must have settled so many times over whoever lay resting here, feverish perhaps, or simply weary, tended quietly by hands that knew, from long practice, exactly which herb to reach for, and exactly how much warmth and how much quiet a sick body truly needed. There was no great drama in this room. Most days, only the same patient, repeated care that we have already met, in different forms, all through this garden, the same slow trust that a body, given the right gentle help and enough time, would very often find its own way back toward health. If you like, you may imagine yourself resting here a while, in this quiet shuttered room, a cup of chamomile cooling gently on a small table beside you, a soft woolen blanket drawn up, and nothing at all expected of you but to rest, exactly as you are, for as long as you need to. There is no urgency anywhere in this room, and there never truly was, only the slow, steady, unhurried belief that care, offered patiently and without haste, does its own quiet good in its own good time. Let us step outside again now, back into the fuller light of the morning, which has grown warmer and more golden while we sat a while in that quiet room, and let us walk on, past the Physic Beds once more, toward a part of the garden built for an altogether different purpose than any we have visited so far. Here, where the paths widen and the beds give way to something closer to architecture, we come to the pleasure garden proper, and its first and most striking feature, a long shaded walk formed not by any wall or roof, but by living branches themselves, trained and woven together over years of patient work. This is the Pleached walk, and if you have never walked beneath one, it is worth taking a moment to picture it clearly, for it is one of the true small marvels of a garden of this age. Young trees, often lime or hornbeam, though sometimes fruiting trees pressed into the same gentle service, were planted in 2 long facing rows, and as they grew, their upper branches were carefully bent and tied and interwoven overhead, guided year upon patient year into a single continuous green roof arching above the path below. By the time such a walk has reached its full growth, and it may take a great many years to do so, the whole structure feels less like a row of individual trees and more like a single long living gallery, dappled with moving light, cool even on the hottest afternoon, and utterly private for a person walking beneath it. It cannot easily be seen from beyond the surrounding hedges. Beneath this green roof and along the low trellises and arbours built at intervals to offer a place to pause, climb the flowering vines the household prized above almost anything else in the whole pleasure garden. Roses grow here in real abundance, trained up wooden frames and along the trellis work, their old varieties smaller and simpler in form than the roses bred in later centuries, but no less fragrant for their simplicity. Deep red and soft pink and pale near white blooms opening in careful succession through the warmer months. Honeysuckle twines among them, its own sweet scent growing strongest toward evening, and its trumpet-shaped flowers drawing, through the long summer afternoons, a steady traffic of bees already busy in the borders below. An arbour, properly built, offered more than simple shade. It offered a kind of small, private room within the larger garden, walled on every side by living green rather than by stone, roofed overhead by the same trained branches or by a wooden lattice thick with climbing rows, and furnished, very often, with a simple bench or a low turf seat set within its shelter. Here, away from the working bustle of the kitchen beds and the careful quiet of the Physic garden, the household's own family might come to sit a while in the cool green privacy of an early afternoon, or a pair of friends might walk slowly together beneath the pleached branches, talking of nothing very urgent at all, exactly as we are doing now. Notice, as we walk beneath this long green roof, how different the quality of this whole part of the garden feels from everywhere we have walked before. There is no harvest expected here, no careful accounting of yield against a kitchen's daily needs. This whole province of the garden exists for one purpose only, and that purpose is rest and beauty and the simple, unhurried pleasure of moving slowly through a cool, scented, dappled space with nothing at all required of you but to notice it. Even the gardener and his boys, who tend this part of the grounds with just as much care as any other, seem, when working here, to move a little more slowly, a little more gently, as though the very air beneath these trained branches asked a softer pace of everyone who entered it. Let your own steps slow now, if they have not already, as we move further along this shaded walk, past one arbour and then another, the roses growing thicker and the honeysuckle's scent growing stronger with every few paces, until at last the path opens out, quite suddenly, into a wider, sunnier clearing at the pleasure garden's heart, where the trees fall back and the sky shows itself again, warm and blue, above a gentle rise of soft green ground. This clearing holds, at its centre, the garden's turf seats, and they deserve a moment of real attention, for they are among the gentlest and most inviting features of the whole enclosure. A turf seat was built much as a low garden wall might be built, but rather than stone, its core was made of packed earth, raised knee-high, or a little more above the surrounding ground and edge all around, with a low retaining border of brick or timber to hold its shape. Over this raised mound, fresh turf was laid, cut carefully from elsewhere and fitted close, so that the whole seat became, within a season or two of its building, a solid green bench grown entirely from living grass, cool and soft to sit upon even on a warm afternoon. But the true gentle art of a turf seat, as the old garden writers of this age were careful to describe, lay in what was grown into that turf, besides the plain grass itself. Chamomile was often set among the turf's roots, its low, feathery leaves spreading to knit the whole surface together, and its faint apple scent released, sweetly, whenever the seat was sat upon or brushed by a passing hand, so that simply resting here for a while filled the air around you with the same gentle fragrance we met earlier in the sickroom's cup of tea. Violets, too, were set into the turf's edges, their small deep blue flowers opening low among the grass in the cooler months of spring, and wild strawberries sometimes crept in as well, its tiny sweet fruit a welcome surprise for a child who thought, sitting down, that they had found nothing more than a plain green bench. Close beside these turf seats, and often at the very centre of the whole clearing, stands the garden's fountain, or in the more modest of these old castles, a simple wellhead of wernstone, its low continuous sound of falling or resting water the one steady undertone beneath every other sound in this whole quiet clearing. Birds and bees, and the faint rustle of the pleached branches all layered gently over that same patient, unhurried murmur. A fountain of this age was rarely grand in the way a later age would come to build them. It might be no more than a simple carved basin, fed by a pipe drawing water down from higher ground, its overflow trickling away along a shallow channel cut into the turf. But even so modest a feature brought a real coolness to the whole clearing on a hot afternoon. and a real, gentle music to fill whatever quiet the garden's visitors were not themselves filling with talk. Sit here a while now, if you like, upon this cool green seat scented faintly with crushed chamomile, and let the low sound of the fountain settle over you exactly as it settled over so many quiet afternoons that came before this one, whole centuries of them, one household after another, each finding, in this very same soft grass and this very same patient water, a small, dependable relief from whatever the rest of the day had asked of them. There is nowhere else you need to be, and nothing else you need to notice, beyond the gentle scent rising from beneath you and the steady, unhurried sound of water finding its own slow way home. Let us rise now, slowly, from the cool turf seat and walk on toward the furthest corner of the whole enclosure, where the pleasure garden's careful order gives way, gradually and gently, to something a little wilder and a little more given over to the working needs of the garden's other quiet inhabitants. The path here grows narrower, and the grass along its edges is allowed to grow a little longer than elsewhere, for this corner belongs, in large part, to the bees. You hear them before you properly see them, a low, steady hum rising and falling on the warming air, busier now than it was in the grey hour when we first entered the garden, for the sun has climbed high enough to have roused every last one of them from their night's rest. Their homes stand in a neat row along the base of the southern wall, a scatter of straw skeps, each one a simple dome woven tightly from twisted straw rope, coiled round and round upon itself and stitched together with split bramble or willow, set upon a low wooden board raised just clear of the damp ground. A skep of this kind held no frames and no movable parts of any sort, unlike the hives a much later age would come to build. The bees within simply built their own comb inside the dome's hollow space, in whatever shape and whatever order suited them, and the beekeeper's relationship with them was, of necessity, a good deal gentler and more watchful than a modern beekeeper's might be, built on close observation rather than on any easy opening and inspecting of frames. He would learn to read, over years of quiet practice, the particular sound and particular pattern of bees flying in and out of a given skep, and to know, from that sound alone, whether a colony was thriving or troubled or preparing, as bees sometimes do, to swarm away entirely in search of a new home. The garden itself was tended in no small part with these bees in mind, for a castle that wished for a generous honey harvest needed to offer its bees a generous and varied supply of flowers through as much of the year as the climate allowed. Lavender grows thick along the border nearest the skeps, its narrow purple spikes drawing a constant, patient traffic of bees through the whole of the summer, and thyme creeps low along the sunniest edge of the path, its tiny flowers, easy to overlook from any real height, proving irresistible at the bee's own low and careful level. Even the fruit trees at the garden's edge, when they came into their own brief burst of spring blossom, drew the bees in such numbers that the whole corner seemed, for those few short weeks, to hum with a single continuous voice. Honey, once gathered, was a resource the household valued for far more than its sweetness alone, though its sweetness, in a world with very little other reliable sugar, was itself no small thing. It found its way into the kitchen, sweetening dishes both plain and grand, and it found its way, too, into the still house and the physic garden both. mixed with herbs to make a soothing draught for a sore throat, or worked into a salve to help draw a wound toward healing, for honey, quite apart from its taste, was widely and rightly trusted to keep a dressed cut clean. The wax, drawn from the same combs once the honey had been carefully strained away, was every bit as valuable to the household as the honey itself, perhaps more so in some seasons, for beeswax candles burned cleaner and brighter, and very much more pleasantly than the tallow candles a poorer household had to make do with, and a great household took a real and visible pride in lighting its finest rooms with beeswax alone on its most important evenings. Wax found its way, besides, into the sealing of letters, into the polishing of fine wood, and into 100 other small, daily uses that a busy household leaned on without, most days, giving them a second thought. Beyond the Skeps, where the garden wall gives way at last to a simple wooden fence, the orchard begins. A loose scatter of fruit trees planted with rather more room to breathe than the tightly ordered beds we walked through earlier in the morning. Apple trees stand here in modest number, their branches already, as we noticed once before, showing the first small hard beginnings of fruit, and among them grow pear trees too, and here and there a plum, each variety chosen over years of trial, for whatever had proven hardiest and most reliable in this particular soil and this particular corner of the world. The grass beneath these trees is allowed to grow longer and softer than anywhere else in the garden, dotted through with small wildflowers the more formal beds would never permit. And it is here, more than almost anywhere else within these walls, that the garden feels least like a place of deliberate human ordering and most like a gentle, half-wild meadow that has simply been allowed to keep growing where it was found. Sheep or a few household geese might be turned loose here between seasons, cropping the grass low and, in their own unhurried way, doing a portion of the gardener's work for him. Rest a while here, beneath the low branches of an apple tree, not yet in fruit, and listen to the bees' steady hum drifting over from the Skeps nearby, and let that low, patient sound become, for a while, the whole of what you are listening to. Nothing urgent in it, nothing that asks anything of you, only the same steady, working murmur that has filled this corner of the garden every summer morning for longer than anyone now living in the castle above could properly say. When you are ready, and there is no hurry at all in the readiness, let us turn back now, away from the orchard's soft wild grass, and walk toward a plainer, more purely practical building standing close by the kitchen garden we visited first this morning, a low stone structure with an outside stair leading up to a loft beneath its sloping roof. This is where the garden's whole harvest, once cut, finds its way toward becoming something the household can keep and use through the long months when nothing at all is growing in the beds outside. Climb the outside stair with me now, worn smooth by generations of careful feet, and duck beneath the low doorway into the loft above. And you will find yourself in a room quite unlike any other we have visited tonight, for its walls and its low-beamed ceiling are hung, thick and close, with bundle upon bundle of drying herbs, tied at their stems with a simple twist of twine and suspended, heads down, from every rafter and hook the room can offer. The air up here is warm and dry, drawn up naturally from the kitchen's own chimney, passing close by one wall, and thick with a mingled smell that no single sentence could ever quite capture. lavender and rosemary and sage and mint, and a dozen other dried herbs all layered one over another, faint and sweet and slightly dusty. The accumulated breath of a whole season's careful harvest slowly giving up its last moisture to the warm, still air. This drying work followed its own careful, unhurried rules, learned over years of trial and, no doubt, a fair few early failures besides. Herbs were cut, wherever possible, in the cool of the morning. Once the dew had lifted, but before the day's full heat had begun to draw off their most precious oils, for a herb cut at midday, wilted and limp from the sun's own heat, dried poorly and lost much of the scent and virtue that made the whole careful harvest worthwhile in the first place. The cut stems were gathered into small, loose bundles rather than tight, crowded ones, for air needed to move freely all through a bundle if it was to dry evenly, and without the risk of a damp, mouldering center spoiling the whole effort. Once thoroughly dry, brittle enough to crumble at a gentle touch, the herbs were taken down and stored more permanently, some crumbled fine and kept in small earthenware jars, set along a shelf at the loft's far end. Others left in looser, whole bundles wrapped in plain linen against the dust. This loft was, in every meaningful sense, the household's own small pharmacy and its own small spice store combined. Drawn on all through the winter months by the cook reaching for a pinch of dried thyme, or by whoever tended the sickroom that week reaching for a handful of dried chamomile flowers to steep into a calming tea, exactly as we imagined resting with a little while ago now. There is a particular, settled comfort in a room like this one, filled floor to rafter with the whole summer's careful labor, dried and stored and waiting patiently for whatever need the coming months might bring. It is a room built entirely on foresight and patience, on the gardener's steady understanding that a warm July afternoon's careful cutting was, in truth, already an act of care extended forward into a cold February evening that had not yet arrived, and might not arrive in this particular year for months and months still to come. Breathe in slowly here if you like, and let that mingled, dusty, sweet smell of a whole season's dried harvest settle over you, warm and dry and faintly comforting, the smell of enough, of a careful household's quiet confidence that whatever winter brings, this loft has already, in its own patient way, prepared for it. Let us climb back down the worn-out side stair now, and walk once more into the fuller light of the garden, back through the pleasure garden's shaded walk, and past the turf seats where we rested a while earlier, toward one last, quieter corner tucked close beside the still house, a corner that belongs, more than any other part of this whole enclosure, to the lady of the household herself. This corner is smaller than the great sweeping beds we have visited elsewhere tonight, more intimate in its scale, edged with a low, neat border and set a little apart from the garden's busier working paths. And it holds, in careful, deliberate arrangement, the flowers a lady of this age turned to most often for her own particular quiet pleasures and her own particular small remedies. Gillyflowers grow here in a full, fragrant clump, their old name given to what we might now call clove pinks. Their ruffled petals are deep, warm red, and their scent, released most strongly toward evening, carrying a spiced sweetness not unlike the very cloves their name recalls. These flowers were prized for their scent alone, certainly tucked into a small dish to sweeten a chamber, but they were prized too as an ingredient, steeped into a cordial or worked, with a good deal of careful sugar, into a sweet conserve meant as much for pleasure as for any remedy. Violets grow low along the border's shaded edge, their small deep flowers opening earliest of all the garden's blooms, welcomed each year as one of the first true signs that winter had properly loosened its grip, and their delicate scent, gathered carefully bloom by bloom, was worked into a soft, pale syrup trusted to soothe a cough and to bring, besides its practical virtue, a small sweet comfort to whoever received a spoonful of it on a difficult day. Primroses cluster nearby, pale and soft and low to the ground, less prized for any remedy than simply for their gentle, early beauty, and roses too grow here again in this quieter corner. A little apart from the grander climbing varieties, trained along the pleasure garden's arbours, chosen instead for their fullness of petal and their particular suitability for the lady's own careful work. Rose petals gathered here, layered thick with sugar and worked patiently by hand over days into a soft, fragrant paste, became the conserve of roses that a household's medical writers of this age recommended for comforting a weak heart and lifting a low spirit alike. A remedy that asked, above all else, for exactly the same patience the whole garden has already taught us tonight. A slow, steady working of simple things into something gentler and more comforting than any of them had been alone. This corner belonged to the lady of the household in a sense that went beyond mere ownership of the ground itself. It was here that she came, in whatever quiet hours a busy household allowed her, to work at her own small remedies and her own small pleasures, the syrups and conserves and sweet waters that eased her family's minor ailments and brightened, too, the more ordinary evenings of an otherwise demanding life. There is a particular kind of quiet dignity in this corner, a sense of a whole private craft, carried on year after year, hand passed to hand from mother to daughter within the household, that the grander chronicles of castle life scarcely ever thought worth setting down, and yet without which a great many quiet comforts, through a great many long years, would simply never have existed at all. Let yourself rest here a while longer, among the gillyflowers and the violets, and the roses gathered for a gentler purpose than the grand pleasure garden's climbing varieties, and let the day's warmth, fuller now than it was even an hour ago, settle over you the way it settles every year into this same quiet, fragrant corner, patient and unhurried, asking nothing more of you than to notice it, softly, and let it be enough. The day has turned now, so gradually that you may not have noticed the turning at all, the high golden light of midday softening, by slow degrees, into the longer, warmer, more amber light of early evening. Somewhere beyond the garden wall, the household has finished its main meal of the day, and the sounds carrying over from the hall have changed in character, less the busy clatter of preparation and more the low, settled murmur of a company at ease, cups refilled, voices unhurried, the day's main labours behind them. It is at this hour, more often than any other, that the lord of the castle, or his lady, or sometimes the whole household together, chose to walk this garden simply for its own sake, not to gather anything, and not to check on anything in particular, but to move slowly through it while the light was at its kindest and the air, cooling now from the day's full heat, carried every scent a little further, and a little more generously than it had at noon. We are going to walk that same slow evening circuit now, retracing, in the day's softest light, a little of the ground we have already covered, and noticing how everything we have met already seems, somehow, gentler and more complete in this changed and changing light. Coming out from the lady's own quiet corner, where the gillyflowers now release their strongest scent of the whole day. For evening is precisely when a clove pink gives most generously of itself. The path leads first back toward the pleasure garden's shaded walk, and here, beneath the pleached branches, the light falls in long, low bars, rather than the scattered dapples of midday, gold rather than white, and the whole green tunnel seems, in this changed light, to glow softly from within. The roses along the arbours have opened fully now, every bud that the morning held closed given the whole day to unfurl, and their scent, mingled with the honeysuckle's own sweetness, hangs thick and warm and unmoving in the still evening air, in a way it never quite managed under the brighter, breezier conditions of noon. The turf seats, when we reach them again, hold the last of the day's warmth in a way that makes them, if anything, even more inviting now than they were this morning, the packed earth beneath their green covering having drawn in hours of steady sun and releasing it now, slowly, back into the cooling evening air. Sit here again a moment, if you like, and notice how the chamomile worked into this seat's turf releases its scent, a little differently in this softer light, less sharp than at midday, rounder somehow, and how the fountain's steady sound seems louder now too, the busy daytime hum of bees and birdsong having quieted enough to let that patient trickle of water carry further across the whole clearing than it could earlier. Above the garden wall, swifts have begun their high, wheeling evening flights, and somewhere beyond the orchard, the first faint stirring of bats, not yet fully emerged, can just be sensed rather than properly seen. A small flicker at the very edge of vision that will grow as the light fades further into their own quiet evening patrol of the moths that the garden's flowers, especially the pale evening blooms, will soon begin drawing toward themselves. There is nothing here to fear in any of this, only the same gentle, ordinary turning of one part of the day into the next, the garden's daytime creatures settling as its evening creatures begin, quietly, and without any real disturbance, to take their place. Walking on past the bee Skeps, the household would have noticed, on an evening walk like this one, how the bees' own busy hum had already begun to quiet, the last stragglers hurrying home along the lavender border before the light failed entirely. For a bee, unlike a bat, has no wish at all to be caught out after dark, and every skep along that southern wall would, within the hour, be sealed and settled for the night, its whole colony gathered close and still within the woven straw. The orchard beyond, in this softer light, takes on a quality quite different from its midday self, the long grass beneath the fruit trees turning from bright green to a deeper, more golden shade, and the trees' own shadows stretching long and thin across the ground, each one pointing, as every evening shadow does, patiently eastward, back toward the direction the whole day has come from. It was not uncommon, in the greater households, for a lord walking here in the evening to pause beneath one particular favoured tree, perhaps the very same tree year after year, simply to stand a while and watch the light change, a small private habit that no chronicle would ever think worth recording, and yet one that must have been repeated, quietly, by countless lords and ladies across countless quiet evenings, just like this one, returning now past the drying loft, its outside stare casting a long shadow of its own across the path you might catch, drifting down from the small high window left open to the evening air, the same warm, dry herbal scent we noticed earlier when we climbed up to visit it, stronger now perhaps, or simply more noticeable against the cooler evening air moving past it. The whole loft, filled floor to rafter with the days, and the season's careful harvest, seems in this light almost to hum with its own quiet, patient readiness, the household's whole winter comfort already gathered and waiting, safe and dry, whatever the coming months might bring. The steward's herbs, when the path brings us past them again, look different too in this changing light, the mint's spreading leaves catching a last warm gleam before the shadow of the western wall reaches them fully, and the sheltered saffron bed, whatever slender purple flowers it holds this particular autumn, glowing with a color that seems, in this hour, almost to match the light around it. It was often at exactly this hour, in fact, that the steward himself made his final walk of the day through this corner, checking what tomorrow's kitchen would need and what the coming week's feast, if one was planned, might yet require him to request of the gardener. The strewing herbs, cut fresh that very morning and carried indoors, long before we ever reached this corner ourselves, have already done their quiet work for the day, scattered now across the hall floor and crushed, again and again, beneath the feet of a household at its evening ease, releasing, with every passing footstep, the same soft meadow sweet and lavender scent that this corner of the garden gave so generously that morning. There is a pleasing symmetry in that thought, worth resting on a moment, the notion that this very bed, standing quiet now in the fading light, has already spent its whole day's gift indoors, in a hall we cannot see from here, but can, in a sense, still feel the gentle presence of, carried on every breath the household inside is quietly taking. The Physic Beds, passed once more in this softening light, seem quieter still than they did even in the still, ordered hour of early morning. Their careful rows of rue and wormwood, and betony and feverfew and sage settling, like everything else in this garden, into the day's last light with no particular urgency about them at all. It is worth remembering, as we pass them this final time, how much of the whole household's quiet daily welfare had, over the course of just this one ordinary day, already passed through these unassuming beds. A cup of chamomile here, a poultice of comfrey there, a handful of betony carried to whoever in the household had needed it most. None of it dramatic, all of it steady, and all of it, in its own patient way, quietly essential. And at last, the walled kitchen garden itself, the first true province we visited this morning, now lying in the long golden light of full evening. Its rows of parsley and leek and cabbage and bean casting their own small shadows across the beaten earth path, the day's harvest already carried indoors hours ago, the beds themselves resting now, much as the whole household is resting in the calm, settled satisfaction of a day's ordinary work well and faithfully done. If the lord or the lady of this household walked this whole circuit tonight, as we ourselves have just walked it, they would have ended, as we are ending, not with any single dramatic sight or sound, but with this same accumulated, gentle sense of a whole small world contained within these walls, having quietly and faithfully done exactly what it was meant to do, day after day, season after season, asking almost nothing of anyone beyond patience, and giving back, in return, a truly remarkable abundance of food and healing and simple, unhurried beauty. Let that same accumulated gentleness settle over you now, here at the edge of the kitchen garden, where our own long walk first began this morning, all those slow hours ago. There is nowhere further we are expected to walk, and nothing further expected of you. Only this same quiet settling, this same slow gathering in of everything the day has offered, exactly as the garden itself, all around you now in the fading gold light, is settling and gathering itself in toward the coming night. The light is failing properly now, the gold of early evening deepening, by slow and steady degrees, into the softer blues and greys of true dusk, and somewhere near the postern gate, a lantern has been lit and set upon a low stone ledge, its small warm flame the first true point of brightness the garden has needed all day. This is the hour of the last rounds, the quiet, unhurried closing up of a whole day's work, and it falls. As it has fallen every single evening, we have not troubled ourselves to count, to the same head gardener who opened the postern gate for us in the grey light so many hours ago, and to the same patient boys who have worked at his side ever since. They begin, as they so often begin any task in this garden, at the kitchen beds nearest the gate, walking the rows one final time with a wooden pail of water carried between them, giving a last careful drink to whatever bed has looked driest through the day's heat. For a plant given water in the cool of evening drinks it in slowly and gently through the night. Far better than water given under a harsh midday sun, where much of it would simply rise away again as vapor before ever properly reaching a thirsty root. The parsley and the chives, the leeks and the cabbage, all receive their share in turn, the boys moving in the same unhurried, practiced rhythm they have kept up all day, a rhythm that asks nothing more of the failing light than enough to see the next row by. At the low gate into the Physic garden, the gardener pauses a moment longer than usual, for these beds ask a slightly more careful final look than the kitchen rows do. He checks the roof for any sign of a bruised or broken stem that might need trimming clean before it can rot back into the rest of the plant, and he runs a careful eye along the wormwood and the betony and the feverfew, noting, in the quiet, private accounting he keeps mostly in his own head, rather than on any written page, which beds have given generously this week, and which have needed rather more coaxing than he would have liked. Satisfied, at last, that all is as it should be, he draws the low gate shut behind him, though it is latched rather than locked, for this inner garden asks watchfulness rather than any true fortification. The strewing bed, when the rounds bring the little party past it, needs almost nothing this late in the day. Its work for the household, already fully spent hours ago in the crushed and fragrant rushes of the hall floor, and the gardener allows himself, here if nowhere else in this whole long round, a moment simply to stand and breathe in the meadowsweet's lingering evening scent, faint now but still present, before moving on toward the steward's own quiet corner. There, the mint and sage are given their own last careful look, and the sheltered saffron bed, precious enough that it warrants a small woven cover drawn gently over it each night against any unexpected chill, receives that same careful covering now, tucked into place by hands that have performed this exact small task so many evenings before that they scarcely need the last of the light to guide them through it. The grapevines along the warm wall are checked too, their trained branches given a final look to be sure no tendril has worked itself loose from its tie during the day's warmth. For a vine left unchecked overnight has a way of finding, by morning, some small new mischief to have gotten into. The still house door, when the round brings them to it, is already closed for the evening, its slow, patient work of the day finished hours before. The last drops of that morning's rose water long since gathered and stoppered safely away in their small glass vessel, and the fire beneath the still itself banked down to a low, safe ember that will neither die out entirely nor flare dangerously bright through the unwatched hours of the night. The gardener tries the door's simple latch once, from long habit rather than any real doubt, and finding it secure, walks on, past the sickroom's shuttered window, where a single small light still burns, low and steady, marking whoever is keeping this particular night's quiet watch over whoever lies resting within. The gardener does not pause at all, for this small corner belongs, at this hour, entirely to its own quiet keeper, and a working gardener's rounds have no proper business intruding on it. He simply notes, as he passes, that the light is burning as it should, and walks on toward the pleasure garden's shaded entrance. Beneath the pleached walk, now grown properly dark, the boys carry the lantern a little higher, for the trained branches overhead block what last light the sky still holds, and their footsteps, still unhurried despite the deepening dark, carry them past arbour after arbour, each one checked in turn for any stray branch that might have worked loose from its trellis during the day, though on most evenings, in truth, there is little enough to find, for a well-trained rose asks for very little correction, once it has properly settled into its frame. At the turf seats, the little party pauses longer than at almost any other stop along this whole evening round, not because any real work remains to be done there, but because the fountain's low, steady sound seems, in the full dark, to carry further and more clearly than it ever did beneath the day's busier noise, and even a tired gardener, closing up after a long day's labour, allows himself a moment simply to stand beside that patient water and let it wash, for a breath or two, the day's whole accumulated effort quietly away. The bee skeps, when the round reaches them at last, are entirely silent now, every last bee gathered close within the woven straw for the night, and the gardener checks each skep with nothing more than a gentle, careful hand laid briefly against its side, feeling for the low, contented warmth of a settled colony, rather than any sign of trouble, and finding, on this particular evening, exactly the steady warmth he was hoping to feel. The orchard fence is the furthest point of this whole long evening circuit, and here the gardener does little more than glance out across the darkening grass beneath the fruit trees, confirming, more from long familiarity than from anything he could truly see in this light, that no stray animal has wandered in through some overlooked gap to spend the night grazing where it should not. Satisfied, he turns back at last, the boys falling into step beside him, and begins the long walk back toward the drying loft, the still house, the physic garden, and finally the kitchen beds and the postern gate itself, retracing, in reverse and in the settling dark, almost the very same path we ourselves walked together in this morning's grey light so very many hours ago. At the drying loft, the outside door is checked and found secure, the whole season's careful harvest safe and dry within, waiting patiently for whatever the coming winter asks of it. The lady's own quiet corner, passed once more in the deepening dusk, releases its gillyflowers, full evening scent one final time before the gardener's lantern moves on past it, and the tools themselves, the spade and the hoe, the small sharp knives and the coils of rope and withy, are gathered up from wherever the day's work left them scattered, and carried back to their proper place in a small shed built into the angle of the kitchen garden's own wall, cleaned of the day's soil with a few brisk wipes of a rough cloth, and set carefully back upon their hooks, ready and waiting for a morning that has not yet arrived. And then, at last, there is nothing left to do but the postern gate itself. The gardener draws it closed behind the last of his boys, the same quiet, tallow-softened hinges giving off no sound at all as it settles into its frame, and he turns the same iron key that opened this whole enclosure to us so very early this morning, sealing the garden gently and completely into its own long night. Stand here with me now, just outside that gate, in the full dark, and turn back for a moment to look at what we cannot properly see anymore. The whole shape of this garden we have spent the entire day slowly walking, the kitchen beds and the Physic Beds, the strewing herbs, and the steward's careful corner, the still house and the sickroom, the pleached walk and the turf seats, the bee Skeps and the orchard, the drying loft and the lady's own quiet flowers, all of it settled now into the same soft, patient darkness, all of it resting, exactly as we ourselves are so very nearly ready to rest. There are sounds still, even in this full dark, an owl somewhere beyond the orchard wall calling once, low and unhurried, and answered, a long moment later, by another further off still, and beneath even that, so faint it is almost more felt than heard, the steady, patient murmur of crickets settling into their own long night's chorus among the turf seat's cool grass. The fountain, though we cannot see it from here, is still running, exactly as it has run all day, and will run all through this coming night, and every night after it, needing no rest at all, asking for none, simply continuing, patient and unhurried, the way water has always continued, long before this garden was ever walled, and long after, in truth, its walls will one day fall. Somewhere above the wall, the first true stars are showing themselves now, faint yet in the last lingering blue of the western sky, but growing steadily surer and steadier as the last of the daylight finally, fully drains away. Dew is already beginning to settle, soft and cool, across every leaf and every blade of turf within these walls, gathering quietly on the rue and the wormwood, on the meadow sweet and the lavender, on the rose petals still open along the pleasure garden's arbours, a fine, silent, nightly gift that the garden receives without any need of the gardener's hand at all, needing, for this one part of its long day's care, only the simple patience of the dark itself. Let us stay here a while longer, just outside the locked postern gate, in the cool and settling dark, for there is a little more still worth knowing about this quiet garden we have spent our whole day walking. Not any single new bed or corner, but the wider, gentler story of how a garden such as this one came to exist at all, and how very many other gardens in very many other castles across a very wide stretch of the old world grew up alongside it, each one its own quiet echo of the same patient tradition. This particular walled enclosure did not spring up from nothing. Its whole careful arrangement, the separate provinces of kitchen and physic and pleasure, the raised beds and the narrow paths, the turf seats and the pleached walks, all of it drew, however distantly, on a long inheritance of garden knowledge that had been travelling slowly across the old world for a great many centuries before this particular castle ever raised its first wall. Some of that knowledge had come down from older monastic gardens, tended for generations by monks whose own quiet, careful discipline suited garden work perhaps better than almost any other kind of daily labor, their infirmaries and their herb yards laid out according to careful written plans that a lay household, generations later, would still recognize something of in its own more worldly grounds. A monk of an earlier age, writing in careful Latin verse about his own small monastery garden, described with real and evident affection the raised beds he tended, the paths between them, and the particular virtues of each plant he grew, betony and rue and sage among them, the very same herbs we ourselves have met today in the physic beds of this later, grander, more worldly castle. That old monastic tradition of careful, orderly, deeply patient garden, keeping never entirely left the wider culture it had helped to shape, and a great household's own gardener. Whether or not he had ever read a single line of that old monk's verse, worked, in his own quiet way, within a habit of mind that verse had helped to first put into careful written words. Other threads of this same wide inheritance travelled by a very different and rather more surprising road. Much of the deeper knowledge of distillation that made the still houses slow, patient work possible at all had originated a long way beyond these castle walls, in learning first developed and refined in lands to the south and east, where careful scholars had studied the properties of plants and the arts of drawing out their essential waters with a precision that the wider Latin-speaking world would only slowly come to match. That knowledge travelled north and west over a long span of years, carried through trade, through scholarship, through the slow, patient copying and translating of texts from one language into another, until at last it reached households such as this one, still, even now, a mark of real prosperity and real curiosity rather than a common, everyday possession. The very shape of the pleasure garden, too, the turf seats and the shaded arbours we rested in earlier this evening, owed something to careful written guidance that had circulated, in this age, among the households wealthy enough to commission or to copy such texts for their own libraries. A scholarly writer of this general period, describing at some length what a truly ideal pleasure garden ought to contain, recommended precisely the kind of raised, turfed bench we sat upon ourselves not long ago, urged that it be planted with fragrant, low-growing herbs rather than left as plain grass alone, and suggested, too, that trees be trained and interwoven to provide exactly the kind of cool, shaded walk we wandered beneath this afternoon. Whether the gardener who first laid out this particular castle's own pleasure garden had ever read those exact words, or whether he had simply learned the same careful arrangement passed down, master to apprentice, through a chain of hands stretching back to whoever first wrote them down, we cannot now say for certain, and there is no real need for us to settle the question tonight. What matters, resting here in the dark outside this particular garden's gate, is simply how widely shared this whole gentle tradition truly was. How many hundreds of gardens, across a great many households and a great many years, all drew from something very like the same deep well of careful, patient knowledge. We might think, too, for a moment, of the women whose quiet, steady labor ran through so much of what we have walked today, largely unrecorded by the grander chronicles of this age, and yet utterly essential to how this whole small world actually functioned. The lady of the household, tending her own quiet corner of gillyflowers and violets and roses, working her slow conserves and her gentle syrups, was engaged in a kind of careful, patient craft that asked every bit as much skill and every bit as much accumulated knowledge as any more formally recorded trade, learned very often from her own mother, and passed in turn to her own daughters, an unbroken thread of quiet expertise running silently alongside the louder, more visible history that the old records chose, for the most part, to preserve instead. The very calendar this whole garden lived by too deserves a moment of gentle notice before we walk on toward our own rest tonight. Illuminated books of this age, the beautifully painted calendars that great households commissioned to mark the passing months, very often showed, month by careful month, exactly the kind of labor we have followed today. A gardener turning soil in the cool early spring, boys weeding through the long warm days of summer, fruit gathered in the golden light of early autumn, and the whole garden, in the depths of winter, shown resting quietly beneath a dusting of careful, painted snow. These images were not simply decoration. They were a kind of careful, shared memory, a way an entire culture had of holding this same patient rhythm of garden work in its own collective mind, month after month, year after year, century after century. The very same rhythm that the gardener who locked this postern gate a little while ago has followed, without needing any painted calendar at all, every single day of his own long working life. It is worth noticing, too, resting here in this quiet dark, how very little of what we have walked through today has actually changed, in its deepest and simplest sense, across all the long centuries since. A garden still needs turning and weeding and watering. A herb still wants cutting in the cool of morning, rather than under a harsh midday sun. A bee still finds its own way home, along the very same kind of lavender border that drew it so patiently, all through this particular afternoon. The names have shifted, and the exact tools have changed their shape 100 times over, and the great walled castles themselves have very largely fallen, one by one, into quiet ruin or gentle transformation into something else entirely. And yet the deep, patient rhythm underneath it all, the slow trust that careful, repeated, unhurried labor will, given enough time, bring forth exactly what a household needs, has never really left us at all. Perhaps that is the truest and gentlest fact this whole long, quiet day has offered us, more than any single herb's old and half-remembered virtue, more than any particular bed's careful arrangement. A garden, walled or otherwise, asks for nothing more than patience, offered steadily, day after day, without any need for hurry or worry or grand event, and it returns, in its own good time and never one day sooner, an abundance that no single hurried effort could ever hope to match. The gardener who closed this gate behind us tonight did not create that quiet truth. He simply lived inside it, the way every gardener before him had lived inside it, and the way, in our own much quieter and much gentler fashion, we ourselves are living inside something very like it right now, here in the soft dark, breathing slowly, asking nothing of the coming minutes beyond simply letting them pass unhurried, exactly as they will, before we let this whole garden settle fully into its own long night. There are a few more of its quiet residents worth meeting, herbs and flowers we walked past today, without quite pausing long enough to properly notice them. Tucked into the margins and the borders of the beds, we have already visited, each one carrying its own small, gentle store of old use and old belief. There is no need to hold on to any of what follows. Let it simply drift past you, the way the last of today's warmth is drifting, slowly, out of the garden stones and into the cooling night air. Along the low border edging the Physic Beds grows hyssop, a modest, bushy little plant with narrow leaves and small spikes of blue flower, valued for centuries as a herb that eased a troubled chest and a persistent cough, and trusted, too, in the oldest writings a household of this age might have known, as a herb of a certain quiet sacredness, mentioned in ancient texts as a plant used in rites of cleansing and purification, a reputation that lingered gently around it, long after those older meanings had faded from most people's daily thought. Marjoram grows nearby, sweet-scented and soft-leaved, prized both for the kitchen, where it lent a warm, gentle flavor to a roasted dish, and for the sickroom, where a warm compress of its leaves was trusted to ease the ache of a stiff joint or a troubled ear. Fennel, too, has its own bed here, tall and feathery, its aniseed sweetness offered both to the cook and to the healer, chewed to settle a restless stomach, or steeped into a gentle water trusted gently, and without any great claim to certainty, to soothe tired eyes. Elder grows not in any single bed, but as a small tree of its own, standing at the corner where the Physic garden meets the orchard, and it held, in this old world, a truly remarkable reputation. Its creamy spring blossoms gathered for a cordial or a gentle wash for the skin, its dark autumn berries cooked into a warming syrup trusted against the chills of winter, and the whole tree itself regarded, by many households, with a particular kind of careful respect, neither quite feared nor quite fully trusted, but treated always with a certain gentle deference all the same. Southernwood grows in a modest clump near the drying loft's outside stair, its fine, feathery, grey-green foliage giving off, when brushed, a sharp, faintly lemon scent. And it earned itself, among its many old country names, a reputation as a herb that kept both moths and, in the more affectionate old sayings, a young man's wandering attention, rather closer to home than it might otherwise have strayed, a small, gentle joke folded into an otherwise entirely practical plant. Costmary grows nearby too, tall and long-leaved, its faint balsamic scent making it a favorite tucked between the pages of a household's most treasured book, both to sweeten the pages and in a more practical turn, to mark a place worth returning to, a use so common in some households that the plant came to carry, in certain old tongues, a name meaning something very close to the herb of the book itself. Marigold grows in bright, generous clumps along the sunniest edge of the kitchen beds, its warm orange petals gathered fresh to brighten a pottage with both color and a mild, pleasant flavor, and dried. Besides, for the sickroom, where its petals were trusted to ease the tenderness of a healing wound and to soothe the redness of an irritated eye. Borage grows a little wild at the kitchen garden's furthest corner, its rough, hairy leaves and its bright, star-shaped blue flowers, a favorite both for scattering fresh atop a cup of wine, where its flowers were said to lift a heavy spirit, and for candying whole in sugar, a delicate sweetmeat that found its way, on special occasions, to even the Lord's own table. Dittany grows in the most sheltered corner of the Physic Beds, a plant not always easy to raise successfully in a cooler climate, and prized, where it could be coaxed to grow at all, for an old and rather dramatic reputation as a herb capable of easing pain and drawing out even the most stubborn, foreign object lodged in a wound, a reputation likely owing more to old legend than to any reliable daily use, and yet persistent enough across many households and many written herbals to have earned the plant a small proud corner of its own here regardless. Valerian grows near the sickroom's shuttered window, its clustered pink-white flowers, pretty enough to please the eye, though it was its root, dug and dried, that the household truly valued. Steeped into a draught trusted, gently and without any great fanfare, to calm a restless mind and ease the whole body toward exactly the kind of deep, unhurried sleep that we ourselves are drifting steadily closer toward, right now, in this soft and settling dark. Lilies grow along the pleasure garden's furthest border, tall and white and faintly luminous, even in this fading light, valued as much for their simple, stately beauty as for any single practical use, though their bulbs, roasted and crushed into a poultice, were trusted, in some households, to draw a stubborn splinter or a deep bruise gently toward healing. Iris, too, grows nearby, its own broad sword-shaped leaves and its pale purple flowers giving way, once dried, to a root prized above almost any other for its sweet, violet-like scent, ground fine and worked into sachets meant to sweeten a chest of linen for months at a time. Notice how many small, quiet purposes these last few plants have served, each one folded gently into the wider rhythm of this garden's whole long year. None of them grand or central to the story we have followed today, and yet each one adding its own small thread to the same wide, patient tapestry, sweetening a page here, easing an ache there, brightening a dish, calming a restless evening. A garden such as this one was never truly made of a few important herbs surrounded by lesser, forgettable ones. It was made, instead, of hundreds of small, quiet contributions, each one modest on its own, and each one, taken together with all the others, entirely necessary to the whole household's steady, unremarkable, deeply reliable comfort. There is a particular kind of calm that comes from simply naming things slowly, one after another, without any real hurry to reach an end. And if you have felt your own breathing settle further while we walked through this last quiet corner of forgotten plants, that is exactly as it should be. There is nothing more asked of you here than to let each name pass gently through your mind and out again. Hyssop, marjoram, fennel, elder, southernwood, costmary, marigold, borage, dittany, valerian, lily, iris, each one a small, soft word, and none of them needing to be remembered or held onto or carried forward into tomorrow at all. There is one more slow, gentle shape worth tracing before we let this whole garden rest, and that is the shape of its own year, the long, unhurried turning of season into season that we have only glimpsed today in the small details of a single morning's dew and a single evening's failing light. Let us walk that longer circle now, slowly, in our own minds, the way the gardener himself carries the whole shape of it, quietly in his own, without ever needing to write a single part of it down. Spring begins in this garden, long before the first bed is properly turned, with a kind of careful watching that has nothing to do with digging at all. The gardener reads the weather in small signs the rest of the household scarcely notices: the particular quality of a morning frost, the first stirring of buds on the pear trees at the orchard's edge, the return, some years earlier and some years later, of the first swifts wheeling above the walls. Only once he judges the ground truly ready, no longer locked hard by frost, and not yet so wet that a spade would simply drown in it, does the real work of the year properly begin. The kitchen beds turned first, since they feed the household soonest, and the Physic Beds following soon after. The earliest sowings are the hardiest, peas and beans pressed into the cool soil, while a late frost is still a real possibility, and the earliest herbs to show real growth are very often the same ones that never fully died back through winter at all. Sage and rosemary holding their leaves through even a hard cold season. Rue and thyme doing much the same, so that a physic garden in earliest spring looks, in truth, only a little more subdued than it looked the previous autumn, its steadier residents simply waiting, patient and largely unchanged, for the warmth to properly return. The turf seats, through this earliest part of the year, are given their own careful spring attention. Any patch worn thin by a winter's use, repaired with fresh turf cut and fitted in, and the chamomile and violets worked into their surface checked, and where needed, encouraged with a careful hand to fill back in wherever the cold months have thinned them. The pleached walk, too, asks its own spring labor. The trained branches checked for any winter damage, and tied back firmly into their long established shape before the new season's growth makes that careful correction very much harder to manage. By the time full spring has properly arrived, the whole garden seems, almost overnight, to have shaken off winter's long quiet entirely. The ladies' corner fills first with violets, and then, close behind them, with the earliest primroses, and the orchard breaks into its brief, glorious burst of blossom, drawing the bees out in numbers that had seemed, only a few weeks before, quite impossible from a handful of Skeps that had spent the whole winter in near total stillness. This is, in truth, one of the busiest seasons of the gardener's whole year. Weeding already beginning in earnest, even as the last of the sowing continues, and yet it carries, too, a particular lightness that the harder labor of full summer does not always manage to match. The simple, uncomplicated pleasure of watching a whole garden wake, bed by bed, from its long winter rest. Summer brings the garden to its own fullest self. Every bed we walked through today, at its most generous and most complete. The kitchen rows heavy with produce that must now be harvested almost daily, rather than merely checked upon. The Physic Beds at the very height of their potency, for many herbs give their strongest oils and their surest virtue in the weeks just before their flowers fully open. And the pleasure garden at its most extravagant, roses climbing thick along every arbour, and the whole air, on a still evening, heavy with a mingled sweetness that no single flower could ever produce alone. This is the season, too, of the heaviest work in the drying loft. For a herb's peak of virtue and a household's peak opportunity to preserve that virtue for the coming winter arrive at almost exactly the same narrow window, and a gardener who missed that window through carelessness or bad weather might find his household considerably poorer come the following February for the oversight. The still house, too, works its hardest through these warm months, for both rose and lavender give their fullest, most generous yield of fragrant petals only briefly, and every batch not gathered and distilled within its proper narrow season is simply a batch the household will not have again until the following year. Midsummer itself held, in many households of this age, a particular significance for the garden that went a little beyond the purely practical, for the longest day of the year was widely regarded, across a great many old traditions, as a moment of particular potency for certain herbs gathered at exactly that turning point, and it was not uncommon for a household to mark the occasion with its own small, gentle observance. Herbs gathered with a little extra ceremony, bonfires lit in the wider village, beyond the castle walls, and a general sense felt through the whole community, rather than confined to the garden alone, that this one particular night deserved to be marked a little differently from all the ordinary nights surrounding it. Autumn arrives more gently than either spring's eager rush or summer's full extravagance, a slow, gradual withdrawal rather than any sudden change. The kitchen garden's last full harvests gathered in, roots lifted and stored, and the orchard's fruit picked carefully, tree by tree, and carried off toward whatever storage the household kept for its winter supply of apples and pears, laid out singly on wooden racks in a cool, dry room where they might, with careful management, last well into the depths of the coming cold season. The Physic Beds, through autumn, are given over increasingly to a different kind of harvest, roots rather than leaves, for many of the garden's most valued medicinal plants store their strongest virtue in their roots precisely as their above-ground growth begins to die back for the year. Comfrey and valerian both lifted now, carefully, and carried to the drying loft to join the season's earlier harvest of leaf and flower. Seed, too, is carefully saved through this season, whole heads of favored plants set aside and dried separately, not for use but for planting again, the household's whole future harvest quietly secured, bed by careful bed, before the ground grows too hard and too cold to work at all. Winter, when it finally settles in fully, brings the garden to its own long, patient rest, though never quite to a complete stillness. The gardener's own labor slows considerably, but does not stop, for pruning still calls him out into the cold, the fruit trees and the climbing roses both needing a careful, patient hand through the dormant months to keep their shape and their future productivity properly in check. The Physic Garden's hardier residents, rue and sage and rosemary among them, still stand through even the coldest weeks, a little subdued perhaps, their growth entirely halted, but their presence, green against a season that offers so very little other color, a real and quiet comfort to anyone walking past them on a grey winter afternoon. The drying loft and the still house's stored waters carry the household through these long, quiet months, every jar and every stoppered bottle a small, patient gift from the previous year's warmer labor, called upon now, again and again, for a kitchen that has little fresh green produce of its own to offer, and for a sickroom that, in truth, sees rather more use through the cold, damp months of winter than through almost any other season of the year. It is worth noticing, resting here in our own quiet dark tonight, how directly this whole long year we have just walked through, spring's eager wakening and summer's full generosity and autumn's careful gathering in, exists entirely in service of exactly this quiet winter need. Every warm season's labor a kind of patient gift sent forward, months in advance, to a colder version of this same household that has not yet arrived, and yet is already, even now, quietly and carefully being cared for. There is one more small, steady figure worth meeting before we walk any further tonight, someone we have mentioned only in passing so far, though her own quiet work touched nearly everything we have already seen. In many of these great households, alongside the head gardener and his boys, there worked a woman whose particular charge was the herb garden's finer, gentler produce, gathering and sorting what the beds gave up each day, carrying baskets of cut herbs between the garden and the kitchen, the still house and the stores, and very often possessing, through long years of exactly this same close daily handling, a knowledge of each plant's particular strength and particular season every bit as deep as the gardener's own. Her days followed much the same unhurried rhythm we have followed together since this morning's grey light, though her own attention moved differently through the garden than the gardener's did, less concerned with the soil itself, and rather more concerned with what the soil had already given. Which bundle of betony was dry enough now to store, and which needed another warm day or two upon the loft's open rafters, which jar of rose water had been standing long enough to settle its last trace of sediment, which basket of cut mint needed to reach the kitchen within the hour if its brightest flavor was not to be lost entirely to a long, slow wilt. It was very often a woman such as this one, working quietly alongside the lady of the household in her own corner of gillyflowers and violets, who carried forward, year after year, the accumulated small knowledge that made every remedy and every dish and every strewn floor of this whole garden actually work as well as it did, a knowledge rarely written down in any formal way, and yet passed with real and lasting care from an older woman to a younger one, exactly the same patient, hand-to-hand inheritance we have already noticed running through so much of this garden's whole long story. Let this last quiet figure join, gently, all the others we have met today in our slow walk through this one castle's gardens, the gardener and his boys, the steward with his careful accounts, the lady at her syrups and conserves, the healer at the sickbed, each one a small, steady thread in the same wide, patient weave, none of them working entirely alone, all of them depending, quietly and constantly, on one another's own steady, unhurried care. Notice, too, before we walk on, how many small measuring habits a garden such as this one asked of everyone who worked within it, none of them written down as a formal rule, and all of them carried, instead, in the quiet, practiced feel of a hand that had done the same task 1,000 times before. A pinch of dried betony for a tea was never weighed on any scale, but simply gathered by feel between 2 fingers, in an amount that generations of the same quiet practice had already taught to be exactly right. A bundle of herbs for the drying loft was judged ready to take down not by any clock or calendar, but by the particular dry, papery whisper its leaves made when brushed lightly with the back of a hand, a sound so familiar to the woman who tended it that she could likely have told you, blindfolded, which of a dozen bundles was ready, and which still needed another warm day upon the rafters. This same quiet, practiced feel ran through nearly every task we have followed today. The gardener judging a bed ready for its next sowing by the simple crumble of soil between his fingers rather than by any written instruction. the steward judging a saffron thread's worth, not by any fixed weight, but by the particular deep gold it lent to a cup of wine when steeped just long enough and no longer. None of this knowledge could easily have been written down, even if someone had wished to, for it lived, most truly, in the hands themselves, learned slowly, over years, and passed onward the only way such knowledge has ever really been passed, by working quietly alongside someone who already knew it and simply, patiently paying attention. Let your own hands, wherever they are resting right now, grow just as soft and just as unhurried as those old, practiced hands, needing nothing more of themselves tonight than to rest, exactly as they are, asking no task of themselves at all, and needing no particular skill or knowledge to simply lie still and warm and at ease in the same soft, patient dark that has settled, by now, over this whole quiet garden. Let one last small image rest with you a moment longer, gentle and unhurried, before we let it, too, drift quietly away. Picture the whole garden exactly as it lies right now. Wall and bed and border, still house and drying loft, turf seat and fountain. Every quiet corner we have wandered through today, folded together into one single, soft, sleeping shape beneath the slow-turning stars, and picture, too, that this same soft shape, patient and complete, is simply resting tonight, the way you yourself are resting, needing nothing further, asking nothing further, whole and at peace exactly as it is. Somewhere close by, though we cannot see it now, the pleasure garden's fountain is still finding its own slow way from the stone lip of its basin down into the shallow channel that carries it, at last, quietly out beneath the wall and into the wider, sleeping fields beyond, exactly as it has run every single night, since long before this particular gardener first took up his own careful post, and exactly as it will go on running, patient and unhurried, long after his own quiet work here is finally gently done. There is a real comfort, is there not, in a sound that asks nothing of the dark to keep it company, content simply to continue, steady and low, whether anyone at all is left awake to notice it or not. Let that same steady, wordless continuing be the last small thing you carry with you now, into your own coming rest, needing no more attention from you than the fountain itself asks of the sleeping garden around it, content simply to go on softly, quietly, unhurried, exactly as it is. And beneath even that low, patient sound, the garden's whole soil is quietly at its own slow work too, though no eye could ever catch it moving, roots easing a little further into the cool, dark earth. Small unseen creatures turning the ground gently as they pass through it, the whole hidden underside of everything we walked across today, going on with its own unhurried business, exactly as it always has, needing no daylight at all to do it, and no watching hand to hurry it along, content simply to continue, patient and unseen, the same slow, steady work that will, in its own good time, and never one moment sooner, bring the whole garden gently round again to another soft grey morning. The church calendar that ran alongside this garden's own quiet seasons touched its work more directly, in fact, than we have yet had time to properly notice, for a great many of the old feast days scattered through the medieval year carried their own small, gentle association with plants and gathering, and a household's garden work often found itself, whether by careful design or simply by long accumulated habit, arranged around exactly these same sacred markers. Late summer, brought one of the more widely observed of these garden-linked occasions, a feast day in the middle of August honoring the Mother of the Faith, on which it became a common custom, across a great many households and a great many regions, to bring a generous gathered bunch of the season's herbs and flowers to the parish church to be blessed before the whole assembled congregation. A household's own garden supplied that bunch, very often chosen with real care from whatever stood fullest and finest at that particular turn of the summer. Wheat gathered alongside herbs in some regions, roses and lavender and chamomile bound together in others, the whole bundle carried home again afterward and kept, in some households, through the following year as a small blessed comfort, tucked above a doorway or kept close by a sick bed in time of real need. Earlier in the year, in the first days of August, another older harvest observance marked the turning of the season from the height of summer's growth toward the beginning of its careful gathering in. A feast whose very name recalled the offering of the year's first bread, baked from the earliest grain. And though this occasion belonged more properly to the wider fields beyond the castle walls than to the walled garden itself, the same spirit of grateful gathering touched the garden too, the steward and the gardener together taking careful stock, at this turning point of the year, of exactly what the whole enclosure had given so far, and what still remained to be brought safely in before autumn's shorter days began to press upon them. Rush-bearing, an old custom observed in a good many parish churches through the warmer months, asked a household's garden to supply, once again, exactly the same fresh rushes and sweet strewing herbs we met earlier today, scattered across the great hall's own floor, carried now instead in careful procession to freshen the floor of the parish church itself. Meadowsweet and sweet flag, and whatever else the season offered woven together and laid down with a real and visible sense of occasion, the whole community briefly sharing in the very same quiet, practical comfort that a great household enjoyed in its own hall almost every single week of the year. It is worth pausing, too, on a handful of real castles and great households whose own gardens have left behind rather clearer traces in the old written record than most, for their example helps to ground everything we have imagined together tonight in something a little closer to solid, documented fact. The household accounts, kept for one particular 13th century Queen record, in careful, itemized entries that a modern reader can still consult, payments made for turf to lay a pleasure lawn, for roses purchased to plant against a garden wall, and for the wages of gardeners kept specifically to tend these very grounds, a rare and precious glimpse into exactly the kind of careful, deliberate cultivation of beauty and fragrance that we have spent this whole evening imagining for our own castle. A scholarly writer working in the early 1300s, whose careful treatise on rural life and estate management circulated widely among the households wealthy enough to commission a copy, devoted real and detailed attention to exactly the kind of pleasure garden we have walked through together tonight, describing at length the ideal proportions of a turfed lawn, the proper method of training trees into a shaded walk, and the particular herbs best suited to a fragrant border, guidance that would have reached, in one copied form or another, a good many of the greatest households across a wide stretch of the medieval world, shaping, in small quiet ways none of those households would likely have thought to credit, gardens very much like our own tonight. Rest a while now on the simple, comforting thought that this garden we have walked together today, though built entirely from imagination, was imagined honestly, drawn from real accounts and real old writing, real herbs with real old reputations, real customs observed by real households across a great many real years. Nothing here has been invented from nothing. It has only been gathered, gently, the way the gardener himself gathers a season's herbs from many separate true sources and woven together, patiently, into a single quiet whole for us to rest inside tonight. There is a last, small skill worth knowing about, one the gardener carried in his own quiet way every single day of his working life, and it had nothing to do with any single bed or border, but with the sky itself, and the small, patient art of reading what it was likely to do next. A gardener of this age kept no written weather record, and had no distant instrument to consult, and yet he was, in his own modest fashion, a careful and practiced observer of a great many small signs the rest of the household scarcely thought to notice at all. A ring around the moon, seen clearly on a still evening, was widely read as a sign that rain was not far off, and a red sky at evening, glowing warm along the western wall, just as the sun finally sank below it, was trusted, in an old saying repeated across a great many households, as a promise of fair weather to follow, while that same red glow seen instead in the morning carried, in the very same old saying, exactly the opposite warning. He watched, too, the behavior of the garden's own creatures, for these same small clues, the bees returning early and in a hurry to their skeps when a storm was building somewhere just beyond sight, the swifts flying low and fast, rather than their usual high, lazy wheeling when the air pressure itself, though he would never have called it that, was shifting toward wet weather. Even the flowers themselves offered their own quiet testimony, certain blooms closing their petals more tightly than usual ahead of a coming rain, a small, living instrument that asked no reading at all beyond a patient, familiar eye. This same patient watchfulness extended, too, to the garden's smaller, less welcome visitors, for no bed of any real size, however carefully tended, was ever entirely free of the pests that found it every bit as inviting as the household itself did. Slugs and snails drawn to the cool, damp shelter beneath a broad cabbage leaf were gathered by hand in the cool of early morning, exactly the same hour we ourselves first entered this garden today, and carried off well beyond the walls before the day's heat had fully roused the household's own attention elsewhere. Aphids, clustering in soft green colonies along a rose's tender new growth, were washed away with a simple mixture of water and a little soap made from the household's own stored ash and fat, a remedy gentle enough not to harm the plant itself, while still discouraging its smaller, hungrier tenants. The gardener had learned, too, over years of careful trial, which plants seemed to thrive rather better when grown near certain neighbors than when left entirely alone, an old, patient wisdom that a much later age would come to call companion planting, though no one working these beds tonight would ever have reached for so formal a term. Garlic and onions, planted along the edge of the rose beds, were trusted to discourage certain troublesome insects that a rose alone might otherwise have attracted in far greater number, and marigold, its bright orange petals already met, once in the kitchen garden's sunniest corner, was planted here, and there among the vegetable rows for exactly this same gentle, protective reason, its own particular scent apparently unwelcome to a great many small creatures that would otherwise have made a happy meal of the tenderer plants growing nearby. None of this careful watching and gentle countering was ever dramatic, and none of it, in truth, was ever entirely certain, for a garden, however carefully tended, remains always subject to a weather and a wildlife entirely beyond any single gardener's full control. But the patient accumulation of small observations, year after year, season after season, gave this one man, and the boys learning steadily at his side, a kind of quiet, practical wisdom that no single written book could ever have taught them quite so thoroughly, a wisdom carried, like so much else we have met tonight, hand to hand, eye to eye, from one patient gardener to the next. Let this last small thought settle over you now, gently, the way every other thought tonight has settled, unhurried and without any need to be held on to. A garden asks its keeper not for cleverness, exactly, but for something quieter and steadier still, a patient, careful attention paid, day after day, to small and ordinary things, the sky, the bees, the underside of a leaf, until that patient attention becomes, almost without anyone quite noticing the change, its own deep and reliable kind of wisdom. There is one last, deeper thread beneath everything we have walked through today, quieter than any single bed or border, and it shaped, in ways we have not yet had time to properly notice, almost every choice the gardener and the household's healers made together, season after season, across this whole long, careful year. The medicine of this age rested on an old and widely shared understanding of the body as a delicate balance of four qualities: warmth and coolness, moisture and dryness, and every plant in this garden was understood, by whoever tended the sickroom, to carry its own particular blend of these same four qualities within it, a blend that made it suited to easing one kind of trouble and entirely unsuited to another. A herb judged warm and dry, sage among them, was reached for to counter a complaint thought to arise from too much cold. Damp humor settled somewhere within the body, while a herb judged cool and moist, like the gentle chamomile we met so often today, was offered instead for a trouble thought to spring from an excess of heat. This was not, to the household that practiced it, a vague or a careless art. It was approached with real and careful seriousness. Whoever tended the sick weighing, as best they were able, both the nature of the complaint before them and the nature of the sufferer's own particular constitution, for a person was understood, in this same old system of thought, to carry their own natural leaning toward one quality or another, some naturally warmer and drier in their whole disposition, others naturally cooler and moister, and a wise healer adjusted their remedy accordingly. The very same herb, sometimes given in a stronger dose to one patient, and a gentler one to another, entirely according to this same careful, individual reading. It is worth saying, gently, and without any need to argue the point one way or another tonight, that we now understand the working of plants and of bodies rather differently than this old system did, and a great many of its particular claims about warmth and coolness would not hold up, in our own age, to careful modern testing. But it would be a mistake, all the same, to think of this old understanding as mere superstition offered without thought or care. It was, in its own age, a genuinely careful and genuinely observant system, built up over centuries of patient watching, of noting which remedies seemed to help and which did not, and refined, generation after generation, by healers who took their quiet responsibility every bit as seriously as any healer takes it today. This same careful framework explains, too, a great deal of what we have already noticed today, without quite naming its deeper cause. Why certain herbs were so often paired together in a single remedy. A warm herb balanced against a cool one, a dry herb against a moist one, the whole careful mixture aimed not at overwhelming a single complaint with a single powerful plant, but at gently coaxing a whole body back toward its own proper, natural balance, patiently, the same slow, unhurried patience that has run through everything else we have met in this garden today. Let this last quiet thought settle over you now, one final time, before the lantern burns down entirely and the whole garden, and you along with it, are finally and completely allowed to rest. Whatever we now understand differently about the body and its healing, the deep patient care behind this old system, the careful watching, the gentle balancing, the unhurried trust that a body given the right quiet help will find its own way back toward wellness, remains even now a true and gentle thing worth carrying with us, softly, into our own quiet rest tonight. There is one more soft, quiet thread worth following before we let the lantern burn down to nothing, and it has less to do with any single plant than with the people who grew up among them, and the wider world beyond these walls that this garden, in its own quiet way, stayed gently connected to all year round. Children of the household, when there were children, grew up almost entirely within reach of this garden's own quiet rhythms, and their earliest small chores very often began right here, long before they were old enough to be trusted with any of the household's grander responsibilities. A young child might be given the simple, steady task of pulling the smallest and most obvious weeds from a bed, already mostly cleared by older hands, learning, long before any of it was ever explained to them in words, the particular shape of a young bean shoot against the shape of an unwanted intruder, the particular smell of a bruised mint leaf, the particular hum a settled beehive makes on a good, calm morning against the sharper, more agitated hum of a hive that something has recently disturbed. They learned, too, in this same unhurried, hands-on way, which flowers could be picked freely, and which beds asked to be left entirely alone, the Physic garden's careful order teaching, almost by itself and without any single stern lecture ever being required, a real and lasting respect for plants whose power to help could, handled carelessly, just as easily turn to harm. A child who grew up walking these same paths, season after season, carried that quiet, careful knowledge forward into their own adult life in a way that no single lesson, however carefully delivered, could ever quite have matched, learned instead through years of simple, repeated, gentle familiarity. The garden, too, kept this castle connected to a much wider world than its own high stone walls might, at first glance, suggest. Seeds and cuttings and young rooted plants traveled between households with real regularity, carried by a traveling relative, a visiting churchman, or simply a trusted messenger sent on some other errand entirely, who happened, besides his main business, to be carrying a small parcel of roots wrapped carefully in damp moss for a cousin's garden 3 days' ride away. A particularly fine rose, admired by a visitor during some earlier stay, might arrive, a season or two later, as a rooted cutting scent with the visitor's own compliments, and take its place in time among the pleasure garden's own established arbours, carrying with it, ever afterward, a small quiet story of exactly where it had first come from. Monasteries, too, played their own steady part in this same wide, patient exchange, for a monastery's own long tradition of careful garden keeping and its own extensive network of daily correspondence with other religious houses across a great distance made it a natural and trusted source of both plants and plant knowledge for the wider households nearby. A castle's own Physic garden, we noted earlier tonight, owed a real debt to exactly this kind of monastic tradition, and that debt was not merely a matter of shared old learning passed down through old written pages, but very often a living, practical exchange as well, a monk's own careful cutting or a monastery's own saved seed finding its way, by entirely ordinary and unremarkable means, into a castle's own beds. A garden of any real size and quality was, besides all its practical daily usefulness, a genuine and visible mark of a household's own standing, and a lord who wished to impress a visiting guest of importance found, in a well-tended pleasure garden, one of the surest and gentlest ways to do it. A walk beneath the pleached branches, a rest upon the fragrant turf seats, a cup of cordial pressed from the still house's own careful rose water. All of these small, unhurried pleasures said something about a household's own patience and prosperity that no amount of grandeur the display could quite so gently or so convincingly achieve. A castle known for the beauty and the bounty of its gardens carried a particular kind of quiet reputation among its neighbours, admired not for anything won by force or by wealth alone, but for something built patiently, season after season, out of nothing grander than good soil and steady, careful hands. It is worth resting one final time on that same quiet thought before we let this whole long day finally close. A garden asks nothing of the wider world beyond a little sun, a little rain, and a great deal of patient, unhurried attention, and it gives back in return not only food and healing, but a kind of gentle prestige too, a slow, living proof that a household understood, deep in its own daily habits, the true and lasting value of patience itself. There is one last quiet corner of this garden story worth visiting before we finally let it rest, and it is not a place at all, but a kind of gentle catalogue, the small everyday troubles that this whole careful arrangement of beds and borders existed, in the end, to ease. We have met most of these plants already today, scattered across the kitchen rows and the Physic beds and the lady's own quiet corner. But there is a particular comfort in gathering them here, one last time, by the trouble each one answered rather than by the bed it grew in, the way a tired mind, drifting towards sleep, so often gathers the day's small pieces together in exactly this loose, unhurried way. For a toothache, that small, sharp misery that could keep a whole household awake through a long night, the garden offered clove pink petals steeped into a warm oil, or more directly still, a sprig of feverfew or a pinch of dried betony held gently against the aching place, offering, if not always a lasting cure, at least a real measure of quiet relief, until a surer remedy, or simply time itself, could finish the work. For the common cold, that gentle nuisance that visited nearly every household each winter without fail, elderflower cordial, made from the very same creamy blossoms we met at the corner of the Physic garden, and the orchard was warmed and sweetened with honey, and offered freely, alongside a tea of dried sage to ease a sore throat, and dried thyme to loosen a tight, troubled chest. For a burn, whether from an unwary hand too close to the kitchen fire, or a careless brush against the still house's own low flame, a fresh leaf of comfrey or a cooling wash of chamomile water was pressed gently against the tender skin, and honey, too, drawn from the very same Skeps we visited near the orchard, was sometimes spread lightly over a dressed burn, trusted, as we learned earlier, to keep such a wound clean while it slowly healed. For a bee sting, an irony not lost on the household that kept its own busy Skeps so close beside its fragrant borders. A crushed leaf of plantain, that plain, broad-leaved plant growing wild along nearly every garden path and every trodden field edge, was pressed directly against the sting, its cool, slightly bitter juice trusted to draw out the worst of the sting's own sharp complaint within a few short minutes. For an upset stomach, whether from too rich a feast or simple ordinary indigestion, mint tea was the household's first and gentlest reach, followed, if the trouble proved more stubborn, by a tea of chamomile or a few crushed seeds of fennel chewed slowly and thoughtfully after a meal that had, perhaps, been a little too generous for its own good. For a headache, that old familiar visitor to nearly every household in every age, Bethany or feverfew was steeped once more, this time into a tea taken slowly, a cool cloth wrung out in lavender water, laid gently across the brow, and the sufferer encouraged, above almost any single herb the garden could offer, simply to lie quiet a while in a dim, cool room. Exactly the kind of quiet room we ourselves visited earlier this evening. For a sleepless night, the very trouble we ourselves are so gently working to ease right now. The garden offered valerian root steeped into a calming draught, chamomile flowers in their own soft, familiar tea, and laid beneath the pillow itself in a small linen sachet, a scatter of dried lavender and hops. Their slow, steady fragrance released a little more with every small movement of a restless head, coaxing, patiently, and without any hurry at all, a troubled mind gradually toward the very rest it was seeking. For a low, weary spirit, the kind of ordinary tiredness that settles over a person after too many long days strung together without proper pause. Borage flowers scattered into a cup of wine were trusted, gently and without any great claim, to lift the heart a little, and a walk through the pleasure garden itself, beneath the pleached branches and past the turf seats and the patient fountain, was very often the surest remedy of all, needing no herb whatsoever beyond the simple, unhurried company of growing, living things, and for the small, ordinary acres of a body simply grown tired from a long day's honest labor, the very trouble the gardener himself must have carried home with him most evenings of his whole working life. A warm bath scented with rosemary and lavender, or a gentle rub of oil infused with comfrey and chamomile worked into stiff shoulders and tired legs, offered exactly the same patient, unhurried comfort this whole garden has offered every single person who has ever walked through it, healer and healed alike, asking nothing more than a little time and a little quiet, and the simple, steady trust that rest, properly given, does its own good work. Notice how every single one of these small remedies gathered together now at the very end of our long walk asks for exactly the same thing this whole garden has asked of us all day, and is asking of you again right now: patience and quiet, and an unhurried trust that comfort, offered gently, and without any rush toward it, arrives in its own good time, precisely when it is needed, and not one moment before. And so, quietly, gently, one small fact at a time, we have walked the whole shape of this one castle's herb and pleasure gardens today. From the grey mist at the postern gate this morning to this same soft dark surrounding us now. We have met the head gardener and his patient boys, walked the walled kitchen garden and the separate physic beds, learned which herbs were strewn for the great hall's floor and which were steeped for the Lord's own table, lingered in the slow, patient still house and the quiet shuttered sickroom, rested beneath the pleached walk and upon the chamomile-scented turf, listened to the bees and wandered the soft orchard grass, climbed to the warm, fragrant drying loft, and paused a while in the lady's own quiet corner of gillyflowers and violets and roses. We have followed, too, the wider turning of this garden's whole slow year, spring's eager wakening and summer's full abundance, autumn's careful gathering in, and winter's own long, patient rest, and we have touched, gently, and without any need to hold too tightly to any single one of them, the old feast days and the old customs that ran alongside that same slow turning, the blessing of herbs in high summer, the rushes carried in careful procession to the parish church, the seeds and cuttings passed quietly between one household's garden and another's across a great, patient distance. We have named a great many small, old words tonight too, rosemary and lavender and thyme, chamomile and feverfew and betony and sage, and we have let each one drift gently through, carrying with it, however briefly, some small echo of the household that first named it, watched it, trusted it, and passed its careful knowledge onward, hand to patient hand, across all the long years between that household and this quiet moment now. None of it, in the end, needs to be remembered. The whole point of a garden such as this one, walked slowly and without any hurry at all, was never to be memorized, bed by bed and herb by herb, but simply to be walked and noticed and allowed gently to become part of the same slow, patient rhythm that has carried every tired body toward rest since long before this particular castle ever raised its first careful wall, and will carry, we can trust, every tired body onward long after these same walls have finally, gently, returned to the quiet earth around them. There is a particular, gentle truth about a garden such as this one that outlasts even its own walls, and it is simply this, that its scent never quite stayed behind when the day's visitors finally walked back through the postern gate and returned to the wider castle beyond it. A sprig of rosemary, tucked absently into a sleeve during a slow afternoon walk, carried its clean, sharp fragrance onward into the evening's hall long after the bed it grew from had been left behind. A lady's own hands, having spent an unhurried hour among the gillyflowers and the roses of her own quiet corner, carried that same soft, spiced sweetness with her for the rest of the day, into every room she afterward entered, a small, wandering trace of the garden following her wherever she went. Even the household's washed linen, laid out to dry across a low hedge at the garden's sunniest edge, drew in something of this same lingering fragrance, lavender and rosemary settling faintly into the very weave of the cloth, so that a bed made up with such linen that same night carried its own small, gentle memory of this whole garden into the sleeper's dreams, long after the sleeper themselves had any conscious thought of where that soft, clean scent had first come from. In this quiet way, The garden was never truly confined behind its own high stone wall at all. It travelled outward, gently and without any effort of its own, on sleeves and hands and freshly washed linen, into every corner of the wider household, a soft, patient, fragrant presence that asked nothing in return for the comfort it so generously and so quietly gave. And so, in its own small way, it is travelling with you too. Right now, this same soft, patient fragrance drifting gently through the last of tonight's slow, imagined walk, settling quietly into your own breath, your own rest, your own long, unhurried night ahead. Consider, too, one last small comfort, the simple fact that a garden of this kind never truly belonged to any single season or any single generation at all. The rose that climbs an arbour this particular summer is not the same plant that climbed it 50 years before. And yet it is, in every way that matters, its own quiet descendant, grown from a cutting taken, patiently, from that very same older stock, carried forward, root and branch, from one gardener's careful hands to the next. The turf seat we rested upon this evening has been repaired and relayed more times than any single record could easily count. Fresh sod fitted into place over the very same patient mound of raised earth that has held some form of seat in this same quiet corner for longer than anyone now tending it could properly say. In this slow, patient way, the garden becomes something rather larger and rather more comforting than any single day's walk through it could quite capture, a long, unbroken thread of careful hands reaching backward through generations we will never meet and forward, toward generations not yet born, each one inheriting the same walled beds, the same old herbs, the same slow, unhurried rhythm of turning and weeding and gathering and resting, and each one adding, in their own quiet turn, some small new patience of their own before passing the whole gentle inheritance onward again. Let all of that settle now, gently, the whole long inheritance of this garden, its many careful hands reaching backward and forward across all those quiet years, and let it settle into the same deep, soft, unhurried dark that has been gathering around this whole enclosure for a good while now. There is nowhere further for us to walk tonight. There is nothing further asked of either of us. We have simply come, at last, to the hour of rest, both for this garden and very gently for you. Let your body begin to soften now, the way the garden itself has softened, bed by bed, corner by corner, all through this long, slow evening. Start wherever feels easiest, perhaps at your own feet, and let them grow heavy and still, the way the beaten earth path grows still once the last footstep of the day has crossed it. No more coming and going now, only quiet, only rest. Let that same soft heaviness rise slowly upward, into your legs, unhurried, patient, exactly as the evening's cool has risen slowly upward through the garden's own turned soil, from root to stem to leaf, asking nothing to move any faster than it is ready to move. Let it rise into your hips and your low back now, soft and heavy, the way the turf seat we rested on earlier held the whole day's warmth deep within itself, patient, unclenched, entirely at ease. There is no need to hold anything tightly anymore, not in your body and not in your mind, no more than the fountain needs to hold its own water tightly, content simply to let it flow gently, exactly as it always has, exactly as it always will, needing no effort from you at all to keep on flowing. Let your chest and your shoulders soften next, the way the pleached branches overhead finally stilled tonight, once the last evening breeze had passed through them, no longer holding any particular shape at all, simply resting, loose and easy, in whatever shape the quiet dark allows them. If you are holding anything at all in your shoulders, any small remaining tightness from the whole of your own day, let it drain gently down and away now, the way the last of the day's warmth is draining, quietly, out of the garden's stone walls, and up into the cool night sky above them. Let your arms grow heavy too, and your hands, soft and open, resting exactly where they are, needing to hold nothing at all, the way the gardener's own tools are resting now, cleaned and hung upon their hooks in the small shed by the kitchen garden wall, their whole day's work fully and faithfully finished. Nothing more required of them until a morning that has not yet come, and does not need to be thought of yet. Let your neck soften and your jaw unclenching gently, the way a closed bud loosens, ever so slowly, in the cool of a summer evening. No hurry in it at all, only a slow, natural easing, exactly as it is ready to ease. Let your face itself grow soft, the small muscles around your eyes releasing, your brow smoothing. The whole of your face resting now, the way the still house rests through the long hours of the night. Its slow work finished, its low fire banked down to nothing more than a single, quiet, glowing ember, and let your breath, all this while, grow slower and deeper and easier, following its own gentle course exactly the way the fountain's water follows its own, in and out, needing no direction from you at all, only your quiet permission to continue exactly as it already knows how. Breathe in slowly and imagine, if you like, the last faint scent of this whole garden drifting to you on that breath, meadowsweet, perhaps, or lavender, or the deep, warm sweetness of a rose still open somewhere along a darkened arbor. And breathe out, slowly, and let every last small tension of your own day drift away on that breath, exactly as the day's dew is settling, right now, soft and silent, onto every leaf within these walls. We walked a very long way together today, through a great many quiet corners of this one gentle garden, and there is no need, now, to hold on to a single one of them. You do not need to remember the rue or the wormwood, the batony or the feverfew. You do not need to recall the exact order of the beds, or the steward's careful accounts, or the still house's slow copper alembic, or the particular scent of gillyflowers at evening. Let all of it drift gently away now, the way the mist drifted away from these same paths so many hours ago this morning, dissolving softly into a light too gentle and too kind to hold anything at all in place against its own wish to simply rest. If a single image wants to stay with you a little longer, let it be only this one, simple and whole, a walled garden, warm stoned and green, resting quietly under a wide dark sky filled with slow turning stars, every bed within it settled, every creature within it sleeping, a single lantern flame, small and steady, burning low by the postern gate, needing nothing more from the night than to be allowed, gently, to go on burning exactly as long as it is meant to, and not one moment longer. The gardener himself, we might imagine, is resting now too, somewhere within the castle walls above the garden he has tended all this long day, his own body as heavy and as soft and as at ease as yours is growing now, his own breath as slow, his own long day's work as fully and as faithfully finished as the tools hung quiet upon their hooks below him. He will rise again tomorrow, in the same grey hour we met him in this morning, and the garden will open its gate to him again, exactly as it always has, and exactly as it always will. But that tomorrow is not yet here, and does not need to be thought of yet, and belongs for now entirely to its own quiet distance, far beyond the soft, warm, unhurried dark that is closing gently around you right now. There is nothing left to do tonight. There is nowhere left to walk, and nothing left to notice, and nothing at all that asks anything further of you. The garden is closed, the gate is locked, the lantern is burning low, and the whole soft weight of this long, gentle day is finally, fully allowed to rest. Let yourself sink now, slowly, the way the last light sank into the garden's western wall this evening, unhurried, complete, with nowhere further to go, and no reason at all to resist it. Let your whole body grow heavier still, warm and soft and utterly at ease, sinking down into whatever is holding you, exactly as the whole tired garden is sinking, right now, into the deep, patient, healing dark of its own long night. Let your mind grow quiet too, the busy chatter of your own day settling, slowly, the way the bees settled into their skeps, close and warm and utterly still, needing nothing more from the coming hours than simply to rest. And now, at the very last, let us return one final time to where our whole long walk began, to the small side gate in the high pale wall, standing quiet now in the deep dark, and let our long day in this old garden come gently, softly, completely to its close. The lantern that was set upon the low stone ledge so many hours ago, when the household's evening rounds first began, is burning very low now, its small warm flame grown thin and steady, needing only the last little of its oil to see the night properly through until the grey hour comes again to relight it. No one is walking the paths any longer. No one is checking a bed, or tying back a wandering vine, or carrying water to a thirsty roe. The whole garden, every last corner of it, has settled fully now into its own long, patient rest, and there is nothing more for it to do tonight but simply to be quietly, exactly as it is, beneath the slow turning stars. Think, if you like, just once more, and only very softly, of everything this one gentle garden has held for us today. The kitchen beds, resting now in their neat, quiet rows, parsley and leek and cabbage settled beneath the cool night air. The Physic Beds beside them, rue and wormwood and betony and feverfew and sage, standing patient and still, their long healing work paused for the night, ready to begin again whenever the household next has need of them. The strewing bed, its meadowsweet and lavender already spent this day in service of a hall, now itself grown quiet and dark. The steward's own careful corner, mint and saffron, and the trained vines along the warm wall, resting until tomorrow's accounts call upon them again. Think of the still house, its slow copper vessel, cooled now and silent, its careful work of rose water and lavender water finished for today and waiting, patiently, for another warm morning to begin it all again. Think of the small shuttered sickroom, its single low light still burning for whoever needs its quiet watching tonight. Chamomile and comfrey and betony resting close at hand should the night ask for them. Think of the pleached walk, dark now beneath its woven green roof, the roses and the honeysuckle folded closed until morning calls them open again. Think of the turf seats, cool and still, chamomile and violets resting quietly in their soft green cover, and the fountain beside them, still running, softly, patiently, exactly as it always runs, needing no daylight, and no watching hand to keep it faithfully at its own gentle work. Think of the bee Skeps, silent now, every last bee gathered close and warm within the woven straw. Think of the orchard beyond them, its long grass cool with settling dew, its fruit trees standing quiet in the dark, their small hard green beginnings of fruit resting, unseen, toward a ripeness still many weeks away. Think of the drying loft, its rafters hung thick with a whole season's careful harvest, warm and dry and patiently waiting for whatever the coming winter will ask of it. Think of the lady's own quiet corner, gillyflowers and violets and roses folded closed for the night, their fullest scent already spent, generously, into this one long day now nearly finished. You do not need to hold on to a single one of these places. You do not need to remember which bed held the rue and which held the sage, or in what order we walked from the gate to the orchard and back again. Let it all simply rest now, exactly as the garden itself is resting, whole and complete and utterly unhurried, needing nothing further from you at all. Let your own breath continue to slow gently, the way it has been slowing all this while, in and out, unhurried, easy, needing no effort and no attention, simply happening quietly. The way the fountain's water simply continues to flow, whether anyone is standing beside it to listen or not. Let your body continue to grow heavier, softer, warmer, sinking further into whatever is holding you, exactly as the whole tired garden has sunk tonight into its own deep and patient dark. If your mind should wander, even now, back through some small piece of today's long walk, a particular scent, a particular herb, a particular quiet corner, let it wander gently, without any need to follow it too closely or to hold it in place. Thoughts, like bees returning to their skep at evening, will find their own way home in their own good time, and there is no need at all for you to chase after them or to hurry them along. There is nothing left to do tonight. There is nowhere left to walk, and nothing left that asks anything further of you. The gate is locked, the lantern is burning its last low light, the garden is resting, and you, too, are free now, completely and entirely free, simply to rest. Let your eyes grow heavy, if they have not already, and let them close, softly, the way the gillyflowers close their petals at the end of a long, warm day. Let your whole body settle, deeper and deeper, into the soft dark, the way the garden's own dew has settled, quietly and completely, over every leaf and every blade of turf within these old stone walls. Let your breathing grow slower still, and deeper still, patient and unhurried, asking nothing of the coming hours but to be allowed, gently, to continue exactly as they are. Somewhere, in the deep quiet beyond these walls, an owl calls once more, low and unhurried, and is answered, a long moment later, by another, further off, and then there is only the soft, steady murmur of crickets, and the patient trickle of the fountain, and the slow, unhurried turning of the stars above the wall, and beneath all of it, softest of all, your own slow, even breath, in and out, carrying you gently, without any hurry at all, toward the deep and healing rest that this whole long, gentle day has been quietly preparing for you from its very first grey hour. Sleep now, exactly as this garden sleeps, patient and whole and entirely at peace. Rest now, exactly as the gardener himself is resting, his long day's work faithfully and fully done. Let the soft dark hold you exactly as it holds every quiet bed and every quiet border within these walls tonight, safe and warm and utterly unhurried. There is nothing more to do, and nowhere more to be, and nothing at all to fear. The quiet apothecary will be here again soon, with another long, calm garden waiting to be walked, another quiet corner of the old world waiting to be gently explored. But that is a matter for another night, and does not need to be thought of now. For tonight, there is only this soft dark, and this slow breath, and this deep, unhurried rest. Sleep well. Rest deeply. All is well. Good night.